Chapter 2536. Although Chu Yufeng was thinking, his speed of escape did not slow down at all. Unexpectedly, the clouds in mid-air suddenly turned into a big hand, grabbing his hair and pulling it down. In the next moment, Chu Yufeng felt his body being clenched into fists by hundreds of hands and beaten up violently. His lower body was being hit by hundreds of knees at the same time. Ouch! Chu Yufeng let out an inhuman cry and said in disbelief, "What is this?" A gentle voice explained, "This is being beaten up. How can one not be beaten up in the martial world? There will be surprises coming one after another, enjoy them well." In the next moment, the cloud suddenly turned into a phoenix, and a mouthful of fire that was so red that it was almost purple came out. Nirvana flame. Chu Yufeng's face turned green. Why was there a phoenix here? Water and fire were mutually exclusive. When the water was high, it could extinguish the fire, and when the fire was high, it could boil the water. If there were things in the world that could really bring about life-threatening danger, this Nirvana flame would at least be in the top 3. Under the miserable condition of half of his body being damaged, Chu Yufeng did not dare to be touched by the Nirvana flame again. He retreated with all his might, as if his life depended on it. Unexpectedly, with a flash of black sword light, another big hole suddenly appeared in his chest. He screamed crazily, and the clouds in the air gathered towards his body like rivers flowing into the sea. "I'm already half a step away. The clouds in the sky are all my life clones. You can't kill me. How can you kill me?" He screamed crazily, and the clouds made whooshing sounds as they quickly gathered into his body. His damaged body that was caught off guard and suffered serious injuries was actually recovering bit by bit. Puff puff. 2 short swords pierced deeply into his 2 eye sockets. Chu Yufeng screamed again and pulled out the flying daggers in his eye sockets. He threw them out, and they turned into 2 streaks of lightning. He shouted angrily, "Who is it?" Mo Lei-er's attack was successful, but she did not stay in the same place. Once a top-notch assassin attacked, she immediately retreated, and the 2 flying daggers naturally could not hurt Mo Lei-er. At this time, Dong Wushang had already stood up, and his dark saber was like a thunderbolt. Downward slash. Pa! What a domineering slash! From the top of Chu Yufeng's head to his chest and abdomen, he was completely split into 2. But he still did not die. His body was clearly cut open, and there was no blood at all. Dong Wushang raised his dark saber. The 2 halves of the body that had been cut in half quickly gathered back together. As if it was of course, it was regenerating. Was there really a body like a cloud and mist? Calamity Sword's light flashed again. Chu Yang's "so what if I slaughter the whole world" technique came to an end. He hurriedly took a breath and used his famous move again. 1 ray of cold light pierces 10,000 feet. The speed of this move was even higher, and it pierced into Chu Yufeng's body by a hair's breadth. The sword qi exploded within Chu Yufeng's body. At the same time, the most evil devouring power of the Calamity Sword was activated. This move was the Yufeng's S attack. The next moment, when 1 half of his body was pressed against the other, the 2 halves of his body began to show signs of healing. Almost at the same time, the clouds and mist within a few hundred miles rushed into his body. Immortal body. Chu Yang and Xie Danqiong looked at each other in surprise. They did not expect this guy to have reached such a stage. If he had chosen to have a fair battle with him right from the start, he might have really suffered a loss at the hands of Yi Shiwen. But Chu Yufeng's recovery speed was much slower than before. For a moment, Chu Yang's moves were entangled, Xie Danqiong's viburnum flowers danced, Rui Butong's nirvana flames burned, and Mo Lei-er's hidden weapons danced. Dong Wushang's dark saber smashed Chu Yufeng's body like a giant hammer. Yes, smashing. He was smashing with the back of his saber. The effect of the saber slashing was far worse than usual. It was better to smash like this. Luo Kedi and Sacrifice Maiden, the 2 new swords, attacked from the air. With a twist of the 2 swords, Chu Yufeng's 2 arms were sent flying. Then, Mo Tianji caught it. However, the 2 arms that had been separated from the body were still struggling violently. Even with Mo Tianji's strength that was also at the pinnacle of the saint stage, he almost couldn't hold on to it. The three great protectors drew their swords and sabers at the same time, turning the two arms into dust. At this moment, Chu Yufeng finally saw blood. However, it was still not blood, but a bloody mist. The two arms that had completely turned into powder transformed into a bloody mist that filled the sky. The mist was misty and drifted in the air. They were slowly turning into clouds. For a moment, the three great protectors didn't know where to attack in order to defeat the enemy. "Don't pass." Mo Tianji made a prompt decision and shouted. Rui Butong didn't hesitate in the slightest. He flashed over and opened his mouth, causing the flames of rebirth to shoot out swiftly and violently once more. Sure enough, it had a miraculous effect. In a short moment, it completely incinerated the bloody mist that the two arms had transformed into, and there wasn't the slightest trace left behind. It seemed that Rui Butong's flames of rebirth was still the most effective way to deal with Chu Yufeng's techniques of rebirth. With one successful move, Chu Yufeng, who was still suffering from the attacks of the 8 great experts, let out a mournful cry that reached his soul. Obviously, the two arms being completely incinerated was more painful for him than all the previous injuries. This result seemed to remind everyone. The Calamity Sword, Dark Saber, and Long Sword struck at the same time again. Large chunks of flesh and bones were cut off. The three great protectors were responsible for chopping the flesh while Rui Butong kept spitting fire. Chu Yufeng howled miserably, "You guys are too much. I've swallowed millions of lives to cultivate the immortal body, the indestructible body." Ah! Another scream was heard. This time, after his legs were cut off, they were instantly incinerated and no longer existed in this world. Almost at the same time, the Calamity Sword struck down from the top of his head, piercing straight into his Baihui acupoint. The power of devouring was fully activated once more. This time, without the interference of the hands and feet, the power of devouring was truly unleashed. Its ability to subdue the enemy was actually not inferior to Rui Butong's flames of rebirth. As the power of devouring increased, the power of the Calamity Sword became more and more powerful. Chu Yufeng's screams became softer and softer. After a long while, the extremely damaged body slowly shrank and gradually turned into a cloud of smoke. Finally, with a bang, even the smoke was gone. Only then did everyone finally put away their weapons. Rui Butong was still afraid that the enemy would come back from the ashes. Very simply, he used the flames of rebirth to burn the clouds and mist here once more, cutting the weeds and removing the roots, eliminating the hidden danger. Only when the space was burned until it collapsed did he stop. The battle was over. Everyone looked at each other and felt a lingering fear in their heart. Facing such an enemy, it was really too terrifying. The battle just now was actually very short, but the intensity of the battle could be seen. If Chu Yufeng was given the slightest chance, he would have escaped. Then, the result of this battle would have been rewritten. Chu Yufeng's cultivation might be slightly higher than everyone else's, but this trait of being unkillable. It was a huge headache. Rui Butong still needed some time to be reborn, but he didn't need it at all. He could use the clouds and mist to replenish himself at any time. Even if he was burned to ashes, they were still worried that he might come back to life. Only when he was burned to the point where not even ashes were left, and not even vaporized, could he be considered dead. Millions of dead souls, only then could such a perverted demon be created. Everyone was still worried. They searched around carefully. Only then did they confirm that Chu Yufeng had really disappeared. Only then did everyone breathe a sigh of relief. He's dead. Rui Butong was still worried and continued to search. We can confirm that he's dead. Chu Yang felt the Calamity Sword tremble slightly. It was a rare feeling of being full. Obviously, the soul power of Chu Yufeng that it swallowed just now was also a very rare supplement for the Calamity Sword. How strong is such an expert? Everyone can see that in this villa, there must be at least one person of the same level. Mo Tianji said seriously, so, everyone, don't let your guard down. Yes. Chu Yang said, that day, Shui Leihan said that. During the battle against the 1,000 Saints True Devil, No one saw any of the great devil masters under the Thousand Saints' true devil. It was said that they were all killed by the saint alone. And based on the current situation, this person is very likely to be one of the great devil masters back then. Cloud Master didn't really kill them at all. Instead, he took them all for his own use. If we calculate in this way, there's a big chance that there are at least 2 such super experts down there if we divide them evenly among the 3 bases. Our chances of winning aren't optimistic. So, we must be very, very careful. Chu Yang took a deep breath. Mo Tianji smiled bitterly. Yes. In fact, only these great devil masters know how to cultivate the Thousand Saints' true spirit. In this aspect, even Cloud Master himself might not know as much as these great devil masters. And we don't have any information in this area. Everything is obvious. Everyone sighed at the same time. There's no time to lose. Chu Yang said, the formation here hasn't really been broken yet. It's just that the Guardian is dead. The formation is still effective. No one can leave this place for now. Let's go down immediately and kill our way in. Mo Tianji said, others may not be able to get out, but it's not necessarily true for the other 2 experts. We must be prepared for this. We can't let anyone leave. Everyone nodded with a heavy expression and solemnly agreed. If the other 2 had similar cultivation as Chu Yufeng, then, this battle might not be very optimistic. I've been cleaning for the whole day today. The reason is because last night, I was chatting in the group. Then, a few of my sisters posted photos. I was very excited to see them. Just as I was commenting on a few photos, a sinister voice came from behind. Yo, you're teasing girls. Your skills are not bad. You even managed to coax them to post photos. My wife is very angry and made me clean today. Chapter 2537. Before this, everyone was optimistic and thought that this was just a training base. Even if there were 1 or 2 high-level or even peak-level saints here, it should not be difficult to kill them all. However, after this battle, they no longer dared to underestimate this place. Chu Yufeng was no longer just a peak-level saint, but a super expert who was half a step away from becoming a saint. He had an almost immortal and indestructible body. If not for his negligence in battle and being caught off guard by Chu Yang, the final result of this battle would be hard to predict. And there were at least 2 more super experts like Chu Yufeng. The following battle would definitely be a great test for Chu Yang and the others. Chu Yang waved his hand. Without hesitation, everyone fell down like meteors. They went straight for the big tree and the hole. He gently used the calamity sword to cut a big hole in the bark. Chu Yang looked at the dark situation inside with rapt attention. Just as he was about to enter, he unexpectedly heard a voice coming from inside. Who is it? There was actually someone. Chu Yang didn't say anything further. He rushed in with a whoosh sound. The sword light suddenly flashed, and boundless sword light instantly filled this narrow space. A few muffled groans suddenly sounded, and then a strong smell of blood assailed their nostrils. Chu Yang suddenly stretched out his hand, and supported the nearest corpse. Then, his sword light flashed like lightning, and circled around this small and narrow space. He waved out a few more streams of energy to support the other few corpses, and they slowly fell to the ground so that these corpses would not make too much noise when they fell. Then, he had time to take a closer look. He saw that there were 4 people in this tunnel, but they had all turned into ghosts under his indiscriminate attack just now. Chu Yang did not stop. The calamity sword once again sent out its devouring power, completely devouring the 4 corpses. In this battle, Chu Yang's calamity sword's devouring power and Rui Butong's nirvana flame were the best weapons to annihilate the enemy. These were the only 2 methods to annihilate the enemy. These were the only 2 ways to ensure that the 10,000 saints' true spirit was completely annihilated. As long as it was possible, Chu Yang or Rui Butong would naturally destroy the enemy. After erasing the traces, Chu Yang searched a few hundred feet forward. After confirming that there was no abnormality, he opened the tree bark. He let everyone in. Next, everyone silently followed the path of the tree hole, heading towards the distant and dark secret passage in the mountain. Chula walked at the back of the group and carefully stuck the piece of bark back on. Then, as he walked forward, he set up a poison array behind him. In such an unusually tightly sealed space, Li Tianlan was still in a daze. This was Chula-Er's natural home ground. All the poisonous fog was not wasted at all. It silently filled the entire passageway. A pure and harmless smile remained on Chula-Er's sweet and pretty face. She waved her fair hands gently, just like a merciful fairy from the heavens who was scattering petals of happiness to the world. Who could have imagined that she would spill it? It was actually a terrifying poisonous fog that could annihilate all life in the world. As Chula-Er moved forward, the gradually rising poisonous fog in the passageway behind her was so thick that it couldn't be dissolved. It could be said that as long as it was not a supermaster like Di, anyone who passed by here, even if it was a high-level saint or a peak saint, would be skinned alive. And, at least a layer of their skin would be skinned alive. This passageway was really very long, as if it had completely opened up the mountain. Everyone walked no less than tens of thousands of feet. But it was still pitch black in front of them. Suddenly, there was another station. The people inside were also wiped out by Chu Yang at the first instance. After that, it was a smooth journey. There were no more hidden guards. Now that things had come to this point, everyone simply let go of their worries. Using his fastest speed, he flew all the way. Finally, there was a flash of light in front. They seemed to have reached the exit. "Big brother, I'll go back first." Chula-Er waved. She went back along the original path. Outside, there were still Jimo, Tai Butian and Wu Qianqian, who couldn't form an effective battle force. Chula-Er went back to guard. With these 4 people around, even if someone was lucky enough to charge through this 1,000-feet passageway filled with poisonous fog, their cultivation would probably be reduced to less than 10%. If they were to face Chula-Er, Jimo, and the other 3, they would definitely not be able to fight back. Regarding this, Chu Yang and Mo Tianji were very assured. The light at the entrance of the cave was getting closer and closer. Chu Yang took the lead and rushed out first. But he almost smashed his head. Because the entrance of the cave was actually not directly open. Instead, it was blocked by a large piece of transparent white crystal wall. The white crystal wall was placed here. Firstly, it had a soundproof effect. Secondly, it blocked the entrance of the cave so that the spiritual energy in this world wouldn't evaporate. Naturally, Chu Yang was completely unaware of this. Now, he and his sword crashed into the white crystal wall just like that. With a loud boom, no one knew whether it was because Chu Yang's head was really hard or because the tribulation sword was really indestructible, but in any case, the white crystal wall exploded like a bomb. It was just that it was accompanied by Chu Yang's murmuring and cursing, "Fuck. I'm dead." It left a discordant note in this exploding firework. Behind him, Mo Tianji and the others tried their best to hold back their laughter and rushed out together. A voice shouted, "Hey, why are you all out?" "No. What are you?" Before the voice finished speaking, the owner of the voice had already been beheaded by Chu Yang and died. In the next moment, everyone floated up and stood in this place that was isolated from the rest of the world. As far as the eye could see, this was a very large basin environment. Green and red flowers covered thousands of acres of land. The scenery was very pleasant. The area was divided into different areas. There were countless people diligently cultivating here. Strong winds blew and shouts rang out continuously. Slightly further away, there was a row of neat houses. There was no telling how many houses there were. As for what happened at the entrance of the cave, because it was too sudden, most people didn't realize it. But those who were closer had already rushed over in shock and anger. But they had just started when they saw sword light flashing in front of them. Saber energy rushed into the sky and snowflakes danced in the air. 12 people were like 12 fierce tigers that had been released from their cages. They pounced into the crowd with unparalleled ferocity. In just one exchange, the ground was already covered in blood. No less than hundreds of people were lying neatly on the ground. This was a critical moment. Facing this 10,000 saints true spirit training ground, there was no room for mercy. Thus, everyone had steeled their hearts to start a massacre, not showing any mercy. Danqiong, you and the 3 great guards go over there. Kedi and Shenyang go over there. Wushang, you and Leia go over there. Tianji, you and Rui Butong go over there. After Chu Yang sent out the 4 directions, he let out a long howl. The sword light of the Calamity sword suddenly flew out. It turned into the most dazzling ball of light. In the next moment, the ball of light suddenly exploded and turned into a shining dragon. It swept out along the ground. A series of screams rang out. With that ball of light as the starting point, the 10,000 saints' true spirits who were in the training stage collapsed in drove. The others also hardened their hearts. They rushed towards their respective positions. Many of them were kidnapped here. They didn't do it willingly. But from the moment they became 10,000 saints' true spirits, it was as if their own selves had already died. What was left were only puppets controlled by the saint monarchs. Tools to seize power. There was no cure. There was no way to break it. Therefore, even though there were still many people who couldn't bear to do it and many who felt uncomfortable, they still killed them mercilessly. Because keeping these people alive would only bring about a great disaster to the human world. These 12 peerless experts started a massacre together. And these people in the base. Most of them didn't have high cultivations. The highest was only in the heaven realm. Under the massacre of the 12 experts, they had no power to resist at all. In just a short while, blood flowed like a river. This continued for a while. In a villa slightly further away, the sound of gongs and drums suddenly rang out. A voice full of anger said, "Who dares to be so arrogant?" Then, a light flashed in mid-air. 2 figures suddenly appeared in the air and shouted, "Stop! I have something to say." How could Chu Yang and the others listen to them and stop? Instead, they went 1 step further. With a wave of the Calamity sword, a cold light pierced 10,000 fathoms. With another fierce move, thousands of people on the field screamed and fell at the same time. Everyone's throat was spurting blood. These people weren't Chu Yufeng. Their vital points were not far from death. "Junior, how dare you?" With an angry shout, the pressure in the sky increased. A holy white light shone, and a figure had already gone above Chu Yang. Chu Yang's body slid like a fish out of the attack range. His body flashed like lightning and rushed into another sports field. Like a torrential storm, he attacked indiscriminately with his 10 swords. Before the screams could be heard, his body had already rushed into the dense crowd on the other side with a sword light. Behind him, the person who was chasing closely was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. He screamed but couldn't do anything to Chu Yang. At this moment, Chu Yang was more slippery than a loach. He didn't care about him at all. That person's cultivation was about the same as Chu Yang's. Even though that person was slightly stronger than Chu Yang, at this moment, Chu Yang was using his movement technique. It was unpredictable, sometimes forward, sometimes backward, sometimes left, sometimes right. It was impossible to catch him. That person passively chased after Chu Yang's footsteps. In fact, he couldn't threaten Chu Yang at all in a short period of time. And Chu Yang's massacre never stopped. The people here were really too dense. They could reach him at any time, and the sharpness of the Calamity sword was displayed vividly at this moment. With a casual swing of the sword, dozens of people would die under the sword easily. This person saw that his pursuit and attacks were completely ineffective. Most of his attacks had hit empty air and only caused huge pits on the ground to be filled with dust. However, he was unable to threaten Chu Yang in the slightest. Helpless, he cursed loudly. His body turned in the air and pounced to the other side. His target was coincidentally Mo Tianji. Let me explain something first. Sister Feng is someone who never reads novels. Wahahaha, then. Chapter 2538. Mo Tianji was even more slippery. With Rui Butong as his cover, it was even more difficult to succeed. The battle here was exceptionally brilliant. On the other side, the remaining people continued to kill without mercy. Almost in an instant, the 12 people had already charged from one side of the cave to the other. Then, they turned around at the same time and charged back. Those who were lucky enough to escape once again faced the call of the Grim Reaper. Only this time, the experts in the villa had all reacted. They shouted angrily and attacked to stop them. Dong Wushang and Mo Lei were already fighting with different enemies. Mo Qingwu was also fighting with 2 women in black. Although these 2 women's cultivation was not as good as Mo Qingwu's, they were still saints. With the 2 of them working together, they could temporarily stop Mo Qingwu. Both sides fought fiercely for a while. Chu Yang, who was on a killing spree, killed all the remaining real spirits on his side. He turned around and joined Mo Qingwu's battle circle. As the calamity sword flashed in the air, it passed through in an extremely unreasonable way and forced its way into the battle circle. One of the women was just about to fight, but the sword in her hand had already turned into powder under the calamity sword. Before she could withdraw her hand to dodge, one of her arms was already gone. Then, her shoulder, chest, head, were all slashed into pieces by Chu Yang's sword. Xie Danqiong led the 3 guards. No one stopped him. He was really like a tiger in a flock of sheep. He killed from the south to the north, and then from the east to the west. He completely carried out Chu Yang's order, leave no one alive. The only 7 experts in the villa had already been dealt with by Chu Yang and the others. Moreover, all of them were at a disadvantage. Xie Danqiong and the others naturally had no qualms about attacking. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, the remaining people let out a howl almost at the same time. They broke out of the encirclement toward the cave entrance. All of them were like stray dogs, panicking like fish that had escaped the net. Xie Danqiong only sneered but did not stop them. He only chased after them. He watched as the remaining few thousand people hurriedly entered the cave entrance. As for the others, they had already been killed long ago. After Xie Danqiong led the guards to search the entire villa, he confirmed that except for a few high-level experts, there was no one left alive. The only remaining ones that had escaped the net. There were only less than 3,000 people who had entered the poisonous fog tunnel. With a single order, the 12 men surrounded the 7 men and began to fight. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Although he had expected that the attack would go smoothly, it still went so smoothly when it came to it. It still made everyone feel relieved. Out of the remaining 7 leaders, the woman in black was the first to be defeated. Her heart was pierced through by Mo Lei's sword, and she was then ruthlessly chopped into pieces by Dong Wushang's dark saber. Then, one of the other 2 died under Luo Kedi's 2 swords. The other one was killed by Rui Butong. Another person saw that something was amiss. He wanted to escape, but Mo Tianji's jade flute had already shot out of his chest. Then, his body exploded with a bang. In the blink of an eye, 5 out of 7 of the enemy's experts had been killed. Of the remaining 2 people, one had messy hair and a face full of beard, while the other had red hair like a ghost. However, these 2 had the highest cultivation bases. He was above Chu Yang, so he could still hold on. They even attacked and defended, not falling into a disadvantage at all. Chu Yang looked at them with his sword in hand and understood. These 2 people should be the great evil master's subordinates. Otherwise, they definitely wouldn't have such strong cultivation bases. One must know that those who were participating in the attack were all peak-level saint. As long as they were slightly weaker, they would be destroyed immediately. However, these 2 people had actually held on until now, not falling into a disadvantage at all. No one is allowed to help, Rui Butong shouted, baring his teeth and rushing forward again. His opponent was the red-haired man. Luo Kedi also wanted to shout, but before he could, a sword light flashed in front of him. Chu Yang had already taken over this opponent. He sneered and said, "Great Devil Master? Which one are you?" The bearded man opposite him said coldly, "It's rare for a kid like you to know the name of our Great Devil Master. Who are you?" Chu Yang brandished his long sword, and sword energy enveloped his opponent like a violent storm. Then, he insipidly said, "Great Devil Master, you're already a thing of the past. There's no place for you in the world right now. You people who blindly hold on to your rotten signboard can't scare anyone at all. The bearded man said coldly, whether the signboard is rotten or not, we'll only know after a battle of life and death. Chu Yang sneered, good, good. As the two talked, sword energy overflowed everywhere, leaving no space at all. Luo Kedi was full of resentment, but he couldn't interfere. Sacrificial Lady went forward to pull him, but Luo Kedi also knew what was good for him, and slowly retreated to one side. Mo Tianji smiled secretly. He had already seen that this opponent's cultivation was not only above Luo Kedi, but also slightly above Chu Yang. If Luo Kedi continued to fight with him alone, he would definitely be at a disadvantage in the end. If Luo Kedi really said no one is allowed to help, the result would be very ugly. Luo Kedi didn't have an immortal body like Rui Butong. And Chu Yang's method of replacing Luo Kedi without leaving a trace was the most appropriate way to solve this situation. How did you find this place? The bearded man faced Chu Yang's storm-like attacks, and it was getting more and more difficult. He couldn't help but be shocked. Although one's cultivation was profound, it didn't necessarily mean that one would have the upper hand on the battlefield. Tactics, weapons, moves, morale, and other conditions were the key to victory or defeat. The bearded man had the upper hand against Luo Ku Di. But he had fallen into a complete disadvantage against Chu Yang. Where did these people come from? And each one of them was so sharp. They knew most of the experts in this world. Even if they didn't know, there would be new information sent in every once in a while. However, only 3 of the people in front of him knew him. As for the others, he didn't know him at all. Who were these people? Of course we can find it. Chu Yang laughed. Lord Saint told us about this place. The bearded man sneered. Bullshit. Chu Yang smiled. You don't believe me? Then who do you think told us? The bearded man's eyes flashed fiercely. He didn't speak anymore. Suddenly, the rapid movement suddenly became silent. Standing with a sword, he suddenly let out a long roar. Every strand of hair on his head stood on end, and a destructive power surged out from his body. Chu Yang's face was solemn. He knew that this guy was ready to go all out. The next attack was definitely going to be an extremely powerful one, but Chu Yang was puzzled. There were only 2 of them left, and the situation was so unfavorable. Why didn't they escape? Even a fool could see the current situation. His group already had the upper hand. Even if they fought desperately, it would be difficult for them to escape defeat. In that case, why didn't they escape? Following the bearded man's desperate move, another destructive force rose. Rui Butong let out a strange cry and somersaulted out. The 2 people opposite him actually chose to go all out at the same time. Why didn't you escape? Chu Yang's calamity sword was ready to be released. What harm was there in slaughtering the entire world? He was already full of energy. He could release it at any time. Facing the enemy who was going all out, he asked in a deep voice. Ha ha. On the opposite side, the bearded man's eyes shot out a cruel look. He said word by word, as devil masters, we have never shown mercy to the enemy, and we've never shown any mercy to ourselves. But you were subdued in the end, and stayed here to be slaves for 1,000,000 years. Chu Yang snorted. If you really didn't care about your own lives, you would have died long ago. You would have died 1,000,000 years ago, but the fact is that you haven't died yet, and are still dragging out an ignoble existence. Now, facing us, you are showing indifference to life and death. Is there any meaning? Are you putting on an act? On the other side, the red-haired man seemed to be hurt by Chu Yang's words. The tyrannical aura on his body became stronger and stronger. He roared, if we could really escape, do we still need you to remind us? Chu Yang's heart moved. Could it be that there are some restrictions here? So that they can't escape at all? Thinking about it, this was indeed the only reasonable way. With the saint's character, how could he not control these people and let them be in charge of this secret base? One must know that these great devil masters were all unruly villains. As long as any one of them walked out and shouted, all of the saint's schemes would be for naught. But they still stayed here obediently. There must be another reason. Chu Yang was thinking about all kinds of reasons when the two people opposite him had already launched an attack. Chu Yang shouted, "Why bother with the rules of the martial world when dealing with such villains? Everyone, attack together and kill them, shameless." The two people opposite him were fuming with anger. They didn't expect that this guy opposite them was also a peak-level saint, one of the top experts in the world, to be so shameless and ungentlemanly. If this attack was launched, the one with the sword might still be able to keep his life, but the skinny one was destined to die together with him. But at this juncture, the guy with the sword actually ordered a group attack. Their efforts were all for naught. This was too depressing. Two peak-level saint experts couldn't even drag one of them down with them in the end. Kill. Mo Tianji gave the order. Dong Wushang, Mo Lei sacrificial maiden, Xie Danqiong, Mo Qingwu, the three guards, Luo Kedi. Everyone rushed up together. Swords and sabers flew out together, and hidden weapons flew everywhere. Everyone gave it their all, giving it their all. A destructive aura suddenly exploded. The two people opposite them gave it their all, and finally launched a desperate attack. Two destructive rays of light suddenly spread out. Like a tsunami, they rolled out furiously in all directions. Chapter 2539. Dozens of terrifying powers that could destroy everything collided at the same time. Chu Yang. So what if Chu Yang's massacre the world, Xie Danqiong's viburnum flower, Mo Tianji's purple jade flute, Mo Qingwu dream saber, Dong Wushang's black saber, Mo Lei's black sword, boom. With an earth-shattering boom, all the buildings in the valley collapsed in an orderly fashion. Dozens of people turned into flying people at the same time. Chu Yang was in midair, but his reaction was the fastest. With a flick of his wrist, the calamity sword flew out of his hand. The bearded man who was stumbling backward suddenly trembled. He watched as the calamity sword pierced through his body, causing him to stagger for 5 steps. The tip of the sword came out of his body and pierced deeply into the red-haired man's heart. A single sword, just a single sword, actually connected the two of them together. Under the joint attack of the 12 experts, the two of them were in a terrible state. Not only were their internal organs shattered, their vital energy was also depleted. Now that the sword pierced through their bodies, they couldn't break free. The calamity sword shone brightly and its devouring power was activated again. Almost at a speed visible to the naked eye, the bodies of the two great evil masters quickly shrank. At this time, the two of them suddenly staggered and gradually steadied themselves. They looked at Chu Yang and the others with strange cruelty and said softly, "You're finished." The corners of the two people's mouths were actually mixed with cruel smiles. Their eyes were also filled with cruel pleasure. The next moment, with a soft sound, the bodies of the two evil masters turned into dry bones. Then, the dry bones turned into powder and scattered on the ground. Two great evil masters. They completely disappeared from this world without a trace. Everyone was a little confused by the behavior of the two people before they died. You're already dead to the point that you can't be any more dead, but you can still say that we're finished. Who's finished? Could it be that these two fellows had lost their minds before they died? Could it be a curse of dissatisfaction? But what's the point? Just as everyone was puzzled, suddenly, a light gust of wind sounded. How could there be wind in such a valley surrounded by mountains and nebulas? Chu Yang and Mo Tianji, who were quick-witted, had this thought. Suddenly, the sound of the wind grew louder, and in an instant, a strong gust of wind blew, sending sand and stones flying. All the corpses on the ground were swept to the side by this sudden gust of wind, and the heart of that gust of wind. A figure gradually took shape. He was wearing a high hat and a wide belt. His face was lean and handsome. His long eyebrows reached his temples, and his eyes were deep. Her long beard fluttered in the wind. His white robes fluttered in the wind as he stood alone in the air. Looking at Chu Yang and the others, he smiled and said, "You have indeed destroyed this place, but you will replace it." Chu Yang and the others were shocked. "Master Yun." The 12 of them were dumbfounded at the same time. Shouldn't the Saint Monarch still be in the extreme heaven and be restrained by the demon empress? Why would he suddenly appear here? What was going on? Dong Wushang was also shocked when he saw this. His heart sank, but he shouted angrily, "Nonsense! Come down and face your death." On the other side, Master Cloud's robes were as white as snow. He looked at Dong Wushang with a sharp gaze and said indifferently, "Not bad, you do have some imposing manner. However, you are destined to be destroyed here." Dong Wushang was about to speak when Mo Tianji suddenly thought of something. He took a step forward and said, "Who are you? What are you planning to do by appearing at this time?" Everyone was surprised when they heard this. Lord Cloud was the Holy Monarch. Everyone had seen his image before. So, how could Mo Tianji say such an inexplicable thing? In the air, Master Yun stood with his hands behind his back. With a bleak expression, he said, "Why, you don't recognize me?" Chu Yang's eyes turned, and he hurriedly said, "Tianji, this seems to be the Saint Monarch." Xiedan Qiong was the quick-witted one. He said, "Something's not right." On the opposite side, Master Yun looked at everyone coldly and said indifferently, "No matter what you say, you are destined to stay here forever." Mo Tianji's eyes flashed with a trace of understanding. He let out a sigh of relief and immediately transmitted a message to everyone, saying, "This person in front of us is not the Saint Monarch himself. This person should be a doppelganger of the Saint Monarch, and a doppelganger that has the consciousness of the real body." Everyone secretly let out a sigh of relief, but they immediately tensed up again. The original body, doppelganger, the real body, the soul. At this level, everyone was well aware of what this represented. It represented an undying and indestructible strength that surpassed the heavenly imperial court. As long as there was a doppelganger, even if the original body was destroyed and the soul scattered, it would not be a big deal. It could be reborn at any time and place, and its strength would not be reduced. When the doppelganger's cultivation reached a certain level, it could feed back to the original body and make up for each other's shortcomings. If there was a doppelganger, it would be equivalent to two people cultivating at the same time. It would be twice the result with half the effort. If the original body rose, the doppelganger would rise. And vice versa. That level was still an unattainable level for the current people. The only thing worth rejoicing over was that this was just a doppelganger. After all, a doppelganger was much weaker than the original body. At this point, everyone finally let out a sigh of relief. However, this doppelganger in front of them was definitely not an ordinary person. Not to mention anything else, just the pressure that he brought to everyone when he first appeared was already far above that of an ordinary peak-level saint. Dong Wushang even felt that the power of this doppelganger of the Saint Monarch was much stronger than that of Zui Wuqing. Dong Wushang was the only one present who had fought with the real descendant of Die head-on. Although there was a big gap in strength between Die and Die's empress, and Zui Wuqing was not the weakest among them, but he was close. However, he was still a member of the strongest group of people in the world. However, the pressure that this doppelganger gave Dong Wushang was actually several times that of Zui Wuqing back then. Chu Yang, Xie Danqiong, and the others had all participated in the encirclement of Yuan Tianjie back then. At that time, Yuan Tianjie only had less than a tenth of his strength left, and everyone was almost wiped out. At this moment, they could clearly feel that this doppelganger in front of them was probably not the least bit inferior to Yuan Tianjie's peak-level cultivation. This doppelganger looked at everyone coldly. Suddenly, he waved his hand, and an inexplicable force rushed up to the sky. That force was extremely fast, and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Chu Yang and the others were all baffled. Originally, everyone had been on their guard, preparing to face any attack that could come at any time. However, this doppelganger had waved his hand in such a meaningless manner. Moreover, he had even released such a huge amount of force. What was the purpose of this? Was it to show off? To intimidate? Wasn't this an unnecessary move? However, in the next moment, the answer came out. Although the force released by that wave of his hand had indeed hit empty air, it was definitely not meaningless. A kind of soft popping sound could be heard continuously in the air. Then, a series of fine rays of light could be seen. Almost invisible rays of light were refracted from the sky just like that. Those rays of light flashed through the air and all gathered on Cloudmaster's doppelganger. Then, they disappeared without a trace. However, what kind of eyesight did Chu Yang and the others have? At this moment, they were all completely focused. Although those rays of light appeared and disappeared in an extremely short period of time, everyone could still see them clearly. These thin rays of light all had a faint blood-red color. That was myriad holy true spirit. Mo Tianji's expression became even more serious. The true intention of Cloudmaster's doppelganger's wave of his hand was obvious. He was summoning the true spirits back. The tens of millions of myriad holy true spirits that everyone had just killed were originally slowly dissipating in this space. However, at this moment, they had all gathered on Cloudmaster's doppelganger. Cloudmaster's doppelganger stood in the air and stretched out his arms. As the dense rays of myriad holy true spirit entered his body, an extremely intoxicated expression appeared on his face. It was as if this was a kind of supreme enjoyment. Then, a gust of wind suddenly blew in the valley. In the air, Cloudmaster's doppelganger's clothes fluttered. His hair was like seaweed in a tsunami, swaying violently and dancing wildly. In the next moment, his eyes suddenly emitted an extremely evil light. A pair of hands slowly reached out toward everyone in front of him and grabbed. However, his posture also seemed as if he wanted to embrace the entire world. This was an extremely disharmonious and contradictory feeling. At the same time, everyone felt that their extremely stable divine souls had actually started to loosen a little. It was as if they were being forcefully pulled by some kind of external force that could not be resisted. Vaguely, there were actually signs of divine soul energy seeping out. The other party's grab was strange and unpredictable. It could actually directly shake one's divine soul and seize one's spiritual energy. Such might was truly shocking, terrifying, and world-shocking. Everyone, be careful. Chu Yang shouted and gave Mo Tianji a look. Then, he merged with the tribulation sword and soared into the air. What harm was there in slaughtering the entire world in one move without holding back? The ultimate sword technique. The sword light rushed toward Cloudmaster's doppelganger like a shooting star. It arrived in a flash. A hint of mockery flashed across Cloudmaster's eyes. He slowly reached out a hand and actually grabbed the tribulation sword that was moving as fast as lightning. Then, he flung it out. Chu Yang, who was caught off guard, was flung out pathetically along with his sword. Once he was flung out, he actually flew more than tens of thousands of feet away. His momentum was still unknown. With a loud boom, he smashed into the mountain that had been reinforced by the Great Nebula Locking Array. Stone chips flew everywhere. A huge hole was smashed into this mountain that had been reinforced by the array for millions of years. Chu Yang's body quickly flipped over and jumped up from the pile of stone chips. There was actually blood flowing from the corners of his mouth. Just this one strike was enough to shock everyone and intimidate everyone. Everyone was clear about Chu Yang's cultivation level. He was undoubtedly one of the best among them. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was the best among them. However, even with such a cultivation level, the other party had sent him flying with just a simple wave of his hand. It was just a simple sweep of his palm. In the process of being sent flying, he couldn't even dissipate the momentum or stabilize himself. It was only until he finally crashed into the wall. Wasn't this person's cultivation a little too terrifying? Chapter 2540. You're no match for me. A wise man submits to circumstances. Just surrender obediently. As long as you listen to me, you may still have a chance to survive for a very, very long time. The eyes of the Cloud Lord's clone revealed an extremely strong and undisguised charm that bewitched one's mind. At the same time, it was also mixed with extreme cruelty. It was like a healthy cat looking at a group of cornered mice. It was enjoying the pleasure of toying with its prey, teasing, ravaging, tormenting, not stopping until it was dead. After this attack, He stood with his hands behind his back. His eyes were full of disdain. He could feel that the current situation was completely under his control. Mo Tianji reached out and stopped everyone who was about to charge forward. He took a deep breath and said, 7-star guards, get into your respective formations. Formation of the Tribulation, Sacrificial Maiden, Lei fill in the gaps. Everyone moved at the same time. Everyone's eyes were full of vigilance and strong caution. Everyone realized that this battle was probably really a battle of life and death. If they lost this battle, everyone would probably vanish into thin air. There was definitely no other possibility. A sword chime sounded again. Chu Yang rushed back like lightning. Although there was still blood at the corners of his mouth, he still stood in front of his brothers. Gradually, his eyes flashed and a fierce fighting spirit soared into the sky. Black saber energy rose at the same time. Dong Wushang drew his saber and stood on Chu Yang's left. Amidst the beautiful viburnum flowers, Xie Danqiong stood on Chu Yang's right. Beside Dong Wushang and Xie Danqiong were Rui Butong and Luo Kedi, respectively. A red shadow flashed and Mo Qingwu soared into the air. Her dreamlike dance moves spread out gracefully, and she stood 3 steps behind Chu Yang. Mo Tianji's white-clothed figure stood in the middle. The purple jade flute shone brightly. Sacrificial Maiden and Mo Lei were at the back. They shrank to the center and used their wings to protect their backs. Chu Yang, Rui Butong, Dong Wushang, Mo Xie Danqiong, Luo Kedi, Light Dance Mo Tianji, Sacrificial Maiden and Mo Lei. The formation of the entire team was arranged according to this pattern, the formation of the Tribulation Battle Formation. Even though there was the Priest Mother and Mo Lei to fill in the gaps, for the real battle formation of Calamity, there was still one person missing. Behind the Priest Mother and Mo Lei there should be another person to be the last guard. At this moment, there were no other candidates. If Ji Mo, who had stayed outside the valley, hadn't been seriously injured, he would have been a suitable candidate. However, at this moment, not to mention that he wasn't here, even if he was, everyone wouldn't feel at ease letting him go into battle. Therefore, he could only use the most primitive Calamity Sword formation to fight the enemy. To deal with this unprecedentedly powerful enemy in front of him. There was no need to leave any path of retreat. If they didn't win this battle, none of them would be able to escape. It didn't matter whether they retreated or not. If he won in the end, everything would be fine, and there would be no need for him to retreat. This was a battle where all means of retreat were cut off. Mo Yuntian's 3 bodyguards were on the other side. They formed a small triangular battle formation on their own, resonating with the triangular formation of Chu Yang's Calamity Sword Formation City. The tip of the formation was aimed directly at Master Yun's clone. A strong murderous aura gradually grew stronger. Everyone, do your best. At this moment, Chu Yang's gaze seemed to have condensed into a solid sword light. He stared at Master Yun and instructed softly. We will live and die together. Mo Tianji, Dong Wushang, Xie Danqiong and the others said in unison. Chu Yang slowly raised the tip of his Calamity Sword. On the tip of the sword, the extremely bright light seemed to have become a cold light that pierced through the universe. It was ready to be unleashed. He said in a low voice, Heaven. The brothers said in unison, I am the king. Chu Yang's voice gradually became hoarse and resolute. Sword light flashed in his eyes. Brothers are here. I am invincible. Everyone roared together. This sudden roar was like thousands of thunderbolts exploding in the clear sky at the same time. Wherever the sound passed, the entire valley seemed to shake a few times. The 3 bodyguards at the side heard this sound. Suddenly, hot tears welled up in their eyes. It was only a short 24 words, but it was as lasting as the sun and the moon. It expressed the fighting spirit and pride of the Calamity Brothers, as well as the incomparable and indelible deep friendship that existed between them. We will do our best. We will live and die together. Heaven. I am the king. Brothers are here. I am invincible. What kind of courage was this? Chu Yang laughed loudly without any fear. He stared at Cloud Lord's clone with an unusually sharp gaze. The tip of his sword seemed to be carrying 1,000,000 kilograms of weight as it slowly rose. Cloud Lord's clone stood in the air with his hands behind his back. He had a faint disdainful smile on his face as he looked at Chu Yang and the others. He had absolute confidence that he could completely defeat Chu Yang and the others' strongest attack. From then on, their confidence would be completely destroyed, and he would be able to control their minds in the future. From this moment on, he would leave a deep impression on them. As the Calamity Sword rose, its aura also gradually increased. The sword light flickered, and it actually caused the entire space to flicker. At this moment, Chu Yang felt that his confidence had swelled without any warning. For a moment, boundless pride soared into the sky. Perhaps it was a long time, or perhaps it was just a moment, but when the tip of the sword finally pointed at Cloud Lord's chest, Chu Yang roared into the sky. Before the roar ended, the wind and clouds surged in the sky, and heaven and earth move. Without saying a single word, Chu Yang's body had already started to move. As soon as he moved, he floated into the sky. He stood opposite Cloud Lord's clone, and he didn't back down at all. The 8 people behind him didn't even need to use any strength. They had already risen into the sky with Chu Yang. In the next moment, sword light suddenly shot out. At this moment, even Cloud Lord and the 3 guards below him had guessed wrong. The subsequent development of the matter was greatly unexpected. All of them thought that Chu Yang must have something to say before the battle since he had risen and stood in front of Lord Cloud's doppelganger without any intention of backing down. As the saying went, no matter how the battle was going to be, one had to go through the door and say a few words first. Fighting to the death as soon as the battle started. That kind of thing was very rare. Even the simplest fight between hooligans had to start with one side cursing, "Fuck you." Then both sides would really fight, right? But Minister Chu had clearly broken this convention this time. At this moment, he had just assumed a conversational posture, but without saying a word, he brazenly attacked. Moreover, the magnificence of the sword light at this moment had already surpassed all the strange magnificence that could be imagined in history. A bit of cold light shot out, and 100,000 feet of cold light burst out. A dazzling dragon emerged from the void, with specks of flickering light all over its body. It carried the aura of slaughtering the world. It shot forward with indomitable will. Vaguely, in the entire sky, there was a delicate red color dancing in the sky. It seemed that there was an ethereal singing coming from beyond the 33 heavens, making it difficult for people to hear clearly. But they couldn't help but be fascinated. And this song and dance, every sound added a lot of strength to this sword. Every movement made the sword light even more beautiful and dreamy, invincible. In the sword light that swept through the world, a domineering black saber appeared again, and saber energy shot out. Thousands of gorgeous flowers accompanied it, and a purple jade flute appeared. The clear sound of the flute quietly sounded, and on the purple jade flute, light purple tassels could be seen floating slightly. At the critical moment, a clear phoenix cry soared into the sky, and a colorful phoenix flew out from the void that was enveloped by the sword light. As the multicolored light flickered, it completely merged with the Calamity Sword. There was also a huge green wolf head. It also suddenly appeared. That was the Wolf King's move, which Chu Yang used with the Calamity Sword. A patch of black fog represented Mo Laiyer's killer move, drifting indeterminately. Everything carried a strong murderous intent. However, everything here was different. Finally, they all merged perfectly into one. This was a miracle that couldn't be achieved at all. How could all the weapons and techniques of completely different attributes be merged into one, just because of one person and one sword? Turning the impossible into the possible. At this moment, just from the tip of a sword that was completely unrelated to him, a miracle was about to happen. Spiritual attack, physical attack, water and fire attack, all at the same time. Cloud Venerable Master's clone suddenly felt extremely gloomy and furious. There was only one thought in his mind: wrong estimation. Chu Yang was directly sent into the mountains by his attack, which made him have a clear understanding of the strength of these people. He was completely convinced that even if they joined forces, they wouldn't be able to harm him. But in this lesson, he realized that he was wrong. What he saw with his eyes, and even what he observed with his divine consciousness, might not be real. In his long life, this was the first time he encountered such a situation. In this instant, Cloudmaster's clone was facing attacks from multiple enemies at almost the same time. But what really made him so depressed that he wanted to go crazy was his eyes clearly saw different kinds of attacks, and these attacks should have come from at least one person, but his instincts told him that he was facing only one person. It was this one person who gave him a terrifying pressure that was equivalent to the combined attacks of two people and then a few times stronger. And this kind of combined power was definitely more than just a few times stronger. Such an unforeseen event caused the three bodyguards below to be dumbfounded. If this level of attack was facing them, they would probably be turned into ashes immediately, right? They wouldn't be able to resist at all. Or perhaps, they wouldn't even be able to summon up the will to resist before they died. This was the truly most terrifying part. On the opposite side, Cloudmaster's clone, who had made the wrong estimation, couldn't maintain his calm demeanor anymore. He suddenly roared, and his body spun abruptly as he used all his strength to resist. For a time, countless snow-white and holy lotuses that emitted a fluorescent light suddenly appeared out of thin air. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. In just an instant, countless lotuses had completely filled the sky, densely packed and airtight. The saint's clone had already disappeared at this moment, which meant that Chu Yang's attack had no target anymore. Chapter 2541. Tens of thousands of lotuses appeared in the air and fell down. Every petal was sharp as the wind whistled and spun. The petals of the lotuses flew out like countless divine weapons, whistling as they attacked. Lotuses appeared and fell continuously. They fell on the sword tip of the Calamity Sword, on the black saber, on the phoenix, on the purple jade flute, on the viburnum flower, and on the red shadows in the sky. Facing such a shocking change, Chu Yang remained silent. He only exerted all his strength, gathering the strength of all his brothers on the Calamity Sword and charging forward. He could feel that the saint's clone was right in front of him. Right in front of him. Although he couldn't see it at all, although so many lotuses that were comparable to divine weapons were an almost insurmountable obstacle, Chu Yang's intuition told him that the saint's clone wasn't far away. Just like what Chu Yang was doing now. The saint's clone was also waiting for an opportunity to defeat Chu Yang and the others in one strike. And the crux of this attack was precisely Chu Yang's body. As long as Chu Yang's peak position was defeated, he would retreat and become dispirited. Then, the other people's problems would be easily solved. Chu Yang's body now had everyone's strength gathered. If the strongest point was broken, the other forces wouldn't be an obstacle at all. Regarding this, the saint's clone's choice wasn't wrong at all. But the only thing he miscalculated again was the strength that Chu Yang displayed. When a few people joined forces, it didn't necessarily mean that their strength would increase exponentially. This was a principle that everyone knew. Often, when two equally matched experts joined forces, their strength wouldn't be as good as if they were alone. And the more people there were, the more restrictions there would be on their cooperation, and the harder it would be to form a tacit understanding, not to mention attacking together. The saint's clone was just a clone. But he had studied this aspect of human nature quite thoroughly. So, he allowed Chu Yang and the others to gather their strength for this moment, in order to defeat all the forces in one fell swoop, and then completely destroy all the confidence of Chu Yang and the others. But he didn't expect that after Chu Yang and the others gathered together and attacked together. The power that was exerted was actually so great. Not only was there no sign of damage, but there was also a flawless tacit understanding. Especially when everyone was wholeheartedly focused, it was an extreme cooperation that completely disregarded their own safety. In fact, at this moment, the word tacit understanding could be used. It was simply not enough to describe the level of cooperation between them. That was a method of completely trusting one's life and handing it over without reservation. Moreover, it was the same for everyone. Otherwise, it would be impossible to reach this stage. The Calamity Sword howled fiercely, crushing all the lotus flowers in front of it. The sword didn't change at all, and the sword light was as sharp as ever. Amidst the petals that filled the sky, the saint's clone suddenly changed his move. His figure moved as if it was a miracle. 3 illusory figures appeared and attacked at the same time, as if they had 3 heads and arms. Due to Chu Yang's miscalculation, Master Cloud's clone was forced to use his trump card in an instant. Clang clang clang. With 3 sword cries, the 3 bodies of the saint's clone each held a sword and performed different moves. The 3 figures fluttered along with the petals that filled the sky with fluttering white clothes. They rushed towards Chu Yang and the others. Its target was the calamity sword in Chu Yang's hand. The 3 swords were all real. Even the 3 figures were all real. They had form and substance, real and not fake. Such a strange and unbelievable martial art that was right in front of everyone's eyes made everyone's heart tremble inexplicably. It was clearly just a clone. It already had such shocking strength. They really didn't know how many trump cards this Master Cloud had. Phantom Spirit Transformation, on one side. The 3 guards exclaimed at the same time. Their strength might be gradually surpassed by Chu Yang and the others, but their accumulated experience over countless years was still not something that Chu Yang and the others could compare with. With just a glance, they had already identified the name of the move used by the saint's clone. The so-called Phantom Spirit Transformation could create many images of oneself in a flash, and these images all had the same power as the original body. They could also hold swords and sabers and fight with the enemy. Although these images only existed for a short period of time and were supported by powerful spiritual energy, they could increase one's strength by several times in an instant. This kind of phantom spirit transformation technique was a realm that they couldn't reach after hundreds of thousands of years of hard work. But at this moment, it was so easily used by the saint's clone. This huge gap almost caused the 3 guards to lose their fighting spirit. Chu Yang didn't show the slightest trace of fear when facing such a marvelous killing move, nor did he waver in the slightest. With a wild howl, he instantly absorbed the heavy pill and the essence of the wondrous medicine that he'd prepared long ago into his dantian, and they surged and transformed into abundant origin energy. The reason why Chu Yang would react in such a way was very simple. At this moment, the energy that he had gathered previously was almost exhausted. No one had expected that a mere clone of Master Cloud could be so powerful. Both sides exhausted their elemental energy, but the result was that Chu Yang's side was at a disadvantage. The other party even had a lot of energy left. He could even make an extremely sharp counterattack. Even after gathering the spiritual energy of several high-level and peak-level saints, they still couldn't trap Master Cloud's clone. He was actually able to break free and use a killing move like phantom deification. At this moment, although they seemed to be evenly matched for the time being, everyone present knew that they had really reached the point where life and death were decided in an instant. So Chu Yang didn't care about the consequences. He mobilized all the forces that he could mobilize. This concerned the life and death of his 8 brothers and sisters. How could he let his guard down? At this moment, Chu Yang was really going all out. Sword intent. Chu Yang roared hoarsely. The calamity sword flashed with green light, and the long-awaited sword intent appeared once again. With an indestructible aura, it surged out crazily. Maybe it was because of the environment, but the sword intent had become unusually heavy ever since it ascended the heavenly imperial court. Every time Chu Yang activated it, he would feel more and more tired. But he didn't know the reason why, so he rarely used it. But at this moment, it was finally the decisive moment of the battle. If he didn't use it, he had to. The long-awaited sword intent whizzed out. In just one exchange, the sword intent's sharpness had already destroyed one of Master Cloud's phantom spirit transformation clones into fragments. After succeeding in the fight, the calamity sword's sword light changed its path and changed into clouds, and clouds gather. As long as I'm alive, I'll be without you. But in the blink of an eye, he defended with all his might. At this moment, clanging sounds rang out one after another. It was as if raindrops were falling from the sky. Master Cloud's illusory swords had already stabbed into the calamity sword's light no less than tens of thousands of times. Every strike was as heavy as a mountain and extremely sharp. If Chu Yang was holding an ordinary sword, he would probably have been smashed into pieces and turned into dust. However, The Calamity Sword was the #1 divine weapon since ancient times. Although it was tested, it could still withstand it. But it was one thing for the Calamity Sword to withstand it. Chu Yang's hand that was holding the sword really couldn't withstand it. In that instant, Chu Yang felt as if his hand had broken into thousands of pieces. He almost couldn't hold the Calamity Sword. The Calamity Sword's light actually scattered. Clouds and clouds gather. As long as I'm alive, I'll be without you's defense was tight and didn't reveal any flaws. However, the combined might of the two phantom spirit transformation clones was too shocking. They almost broke through this unbreakable defense. This was a difference in cultivation and not a flaw in the technique. Chu Yang, Mo Tianji, and the others all opened their mouths at the same time and spat out a mouthful of blood. Clouds and clouds gather to become emperor. Chu Yang roared hysterically. Sword light flashed in the air again. Thousands of streaks of sword energy shot out in all directions. A crown that was as bright as the sun in the sky suddenly appeared. Emperor's Descent. The clone of the Holy Monarch originally possessed the aura of a monarch descending. However, under this special attack that gathered the winds and clouds as a monarch, the aura of a monarch that was connected with the heavens and earth caused the clone of the Holy Monarch to pale in comparison. Master Cloud's clone finally revealed an unprecedented look of fear in his eyes. The crown suddenly pressed down. Calamity Sword's most ferocious ultimate move finally exploded from Chu Yang's hand. If he didn't succeed, he would die trying. Reverend Cloud's clone let out a shrill cry when he faced the decisive slash. For the first time, he retreated, and his body continuously moved in different directions in midair. He was sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, sometimes to the front, and sometimes to the back. He drifted about, and in the blink of an eye, he had already moved in more than 10 million directions. However, Chu Yang controlled the Calamity Sword and charged forward in a single direction without turning back. He didn't change direction at all. He completely ignored the figures that were wandering around him. Mo Qingwu's Heavenly Dance, Mo Tianji's Purple Jade Flute, Rui Butong's Phoenix Transformation, Xie Danqiong's Viburnum Flower, Dong Wushang's Dark Saber, Mo Leiyer's Hidden Weapon, Luo Kedi's Sword, Lady Sacrificial's Wolf Fangs, they all attacked at the same time. At the final moment, "Junior, how dare you?" Master Cloud's clone screamed. Suddenly, he rose into the sky. Chu Yang carried the fiercest storm of killing intent in the world and finally changed direction. He charged forward. He didn't seem to be forcing it. He chased closely behind Master Cloud's clone. The tip of his sword was only a few millimeters away from his back. However, that few millimeters was like a moat that couldn't be crossed. Master Cloud's clone was like a bolt of lightning. Chu Yang's Calamity Sword chased after him like a rainbow. Behind Chu Yang, 8 people were following him closely. They were like a long string, rushing straight up into the sky. Chapter 2542. None of them had any contact with each other, but they had become an inseparable entity. Wherever Chu Yang went, everyone would follow. At this moment, Chu Yang didn't feel any pressure at all. The entire formation and everyone else felt as if they were part of his body. It was a very mysterious yet very real feeling. Everyone didn't feel any repulsion, whether physically or mentally. They really treated themselves as a part of Chu Yang's body. "We'll follow you. We'll fight you. We'll follow your orders. We'll live and die with you. If you win, we'll follow you into the clouds. If you lose, we'll follow you into dust." As Master Cloud's clone charged upwards, there were still counterattacks. Countless lotus flowers fell like snowflakes, their petals as sharp as knives. Chu Yang's Calamity Sword didn't give up. The moment those petals met the Calamity Sword, they all turned into gusts of wind and brushed past him. The bodies of Chu Yang and the others were already dripping with blood. The destructive power of those lotus petals was still not to be underestimated. Even though everyone had invincible Vajra bodies and their main force had been eliminated by the Calamity Sword, there were still some remnants. It was inevitable that they would be injured. How could it be possible that the lotus flowers that filled the heavens and earth did not touch his body at all? The sword energy transformed into a faint green killing intent as it chased after Master Cloud's clone. Master Cloud's clone fled as fast as he could. He thought to himself, as long as I can escape from this sword attack and catch my breath, I'll definitely be able to kill all of them. If he knew this, how could Chu Yang and the others not know? In a battle between experts, especially against an expert like Master Cloud's clone, victory or defeat was really decided in an instant. Right now, Chu Yang had spent so much effort to seize this opportunity. How could he let it go so easily? Even if he died, he had to hold on tightly. He just needed to move forward an inch. Chu Yang's gaze was fixed on Master Cloud's back. There, the tip of the sword was just a hair away from Master Cloud's back. It was just half an inch away. As long as the tip of the Calamity Sword could touch Master Cloud's clone's skin, then the devouring power would be unleashed with all its might, regardless of the consequence. As long as he could touch it, there wouldn't be any danger in today's battle at least. However, if he couldn't catch up in the end and failed at the last step, in that case, there was only one outcome today: complete annihilation. There would definitely be no more flukes. All the success and failure. At this moment, on this sword, Chu Yang had already gone all out. During this process, both sides had already pushed their speed to the limit, or even exceeded it. The Holy Monarch's clone could feel a stabbing pain in his back. It was a terrifying shadow that threatened his life. He activated all of his potential and even released the myriad holiness true spirit he had just absorbed into his body. It turned into a push forward. Strictly speaking, this method was akin to drinking poison to quench one's thirst. It was one thing to stimulate all of one's potential, as it was just an avatar, so it didn't matter if it had more potential or not. But detonating the myriad holiness true spirit that had just been absorbed into one's body would have far-reaching effects. The true owner of the myriad holiness true spirit was his main body. In other words, although the avatar of the Sage Monarch could absorb and even borrow the strength of the Sage Monarch, it was only a carrier in the end. It wasn't able to truly display the full might of the Sage Monarch's true spirit. Forcefully erupting like this was equal to the most extravagant squandering. Moreover, the myriad saint's true spirit also had a limit. It was a tree without roots, a river without roots. In fact, the Holy Monarch's clone was also very clear about this point. He was clearer than anyone else, but the current situation was truly out of the question. As long as he was pierced by this devil-like sword behind him, what awaited him would be him. That would be the tragic ending of being consigned to eternal damnation. The chilliness of the sword was like a maggot in one's bones, unable to be shaken off. In the process of this stalemate, he had already used at least 300 different movement techniques, but he still couldn't shake it off. The myriad holiness true spirit's power that had just been absorbed into his body had already been nearly exhausted. However, this sword was still following behind him. Although it hadn't really touched his body yet, the distance between them was still not the slightest bit. The concealed feeling of the sword's tip being able to swallow the world was clearly discernible, and there was no facade at all. So much so that the Holy Monarch's clone could truly feel that the sword's eagerness to drill into his flesh and devour him was actually not concealed at all. Not only were these people able to unleash such strength when joining forces, but this sword was actually a demonic sword. A demonic sword that possessed a sword soul. This sudden discovery made the Holy Monarch's clone even more depressed. The person chasing after him was already exhausted, but he was still persevering. The person running in front was also nearing the end of his life, and it was difficult for him to continue. Between this heaven and earth, it was like two streams of light, one in front and one behind, endlessly chasing after each other, rushing up, turning around, returning, rushing again. From south to north, from east to west, from bottom to top, and back again, it was simply like an endless monotonous game of death that never stopped. The Holy Monarch's clone was in a very bad situation, but the same was true for Tribulation's side. Chu Yang and the others could clearly feel that their heartbeats were gradually intensifying until they were like drums, almost jumping out of their chest. All the blood in their bodies seemed to have rushed to the top of their heads, as if in the next moment, or perhaps in the next moment, their heads would explode from the rush of blood. Even if it wasn't the next moment, the next moment, and the next moment, they could collapse at any time. And as long as any one of them couldn't hold on and collapsed first, everyone would collapse at the same time, without exception. The continued stalemate between the two sides had already entered a dangerous situation. Even if one side survived, the other side might not necessarily survive. It wasn't even a situation where both sides would suffer, but a situation where both sides would lose and die. And for Chu Yang and the others, this was still the ideal ending. In this case, the biggest possibility was that Chu Yang's side couldn't hold on first. Below, the 3 7-star guards stared intently at the two streams of light that continued to hover in the sky, chasing each other. Unknowingly, they had already formed a strange formation. Just at the moment when the two streams of light rushed to the sky again and almost disappeared, the three people suddenly leaped up at the same time, turning into 3 long rainbows that soared into the sky, shocking the sky. In a flash, they had already rushed thousands of feet into the sky. And at this moment, the stream of light that the Holy Monarch's clone had transformed into happened to turn back from the highest point, and rushed downwards, accompanied by a sharp whistling sound. The 3 7-star guards made up their minds, and without hesitation, rushed towards the stream of light at the same time. 3 magnificent sword lights flashed at the same time. This was a desperate and decisive blow. Everyone present had already clearly seen that although the current situation seemed to be that Chu Yang and the others had a slight advantage temporarily, and had the upper hand, this advantage would definitely not last long. Once the battle dragged on for a long time, the one who would eventually gain the upper hand would still be the Holy Monarch's clone. In fact, on the surface, it seemed that Chu Yang had the upper hand, but in fact, the one who controlled the outcome of this battle was the Holy Monarch's clone. After all, the Holy Monarch's clone had the power transformed from the 10,000 Saints' true spirit as a foundation, so no matter how much it was consumed, even if it was all consumed, the impact on his body was relatively limited. However, Chu Yang was consuming his own cultivation, martial power, physical strength, and mental strength. Especially physical strength and mental strength. The rest could be recovered with various elixirs, such as heavy pills, life spring water, and so on. However, physical strength and mental strength were the most difficult to recover. Also, the members who formed the tribulation formation now were ultimately not the real tribulation. Regardless of whether it was Mo Lei or the sacrificial maiden, they were not the real tribulation people. No matter how hard they tried, there was a limit to their assistance to the tribulation formation. Correspondingly, the assistance that the tribulation formation provided to them was relatively limited. Although their own strength was also extremely high, because of the difference in their assistance, it would cause a subtle increase in consumption. If there was anyone who could not hold on in this formation, it would definitely be one of the two. In the current situation, the most important thing was endurance, and the two of them were destined to be at the bottom in terms of endurance. Once there was really someone on Chu Yang's side who was exhausted, then everything would really be irreversible. The only solution now, or rather, the only way to disrupt the current rhythm of the battle, was to stop the Cloud Lord's clone in this pursuit at all cost. Even if it was just a little bit, or even an undetectable moment of stagnation, it would be enough, and this little bit of time, or rather, opportunity, would require the 3 of them to exchange for it with their lives. Otherwise, they would definitely not be able to stop it, nor would they be able to exchange it. At this moment, the 3 guards made up their minds and made up their mind. 3 magnificent sword lights, with an aura of no return and no turning back, rushed forward. The distance between the two sides was actually very far, but under the situation where both sides were advancing at extreme speed, it was almost a blink of an eye before the two sides had already come into contact. On the opposite side, the light descending from the sky suddenly accelerated again at the critical moment. With a sudden turn, it brushed past the 3 sword lights with a swoosh. As for Chu Yang and the rest, they also followed the shadow of the clone and brushed past the sword lights. The 3 people's suicidal attack missed just like that. There was a faint trace of blood on the tip of the sword. Although the Cloud Lord's clone did not show any signs of slowing down, under this sword, he was finally injured. Everyone could see the current situation clearly. With the strength and cultivation of this clone, It was definitely not difficult for him to kill the 3 guards. As long as he dared to charge head-on, he could kill the 3 of them in an instant. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was as easy as flipping one's hand. However, the instant he charged and flipped his palm was enough for Chu Yang to stab the calamity sword into his body, so he did not dare to. Chapter 2543. Just a little bit was enough to change the outcome of the battle. The 3 of them were determined to exchange their lives for a chance to destroy the enemy. This was something that everyone knew. Therefore, Cloudmaster's clone didn't fight back even though he was injured. He only dodged and avoided the situation where his speed slowed down. In his heart, no one else's life was as important as his own. Even if everyone else was added together, it wouldn't be as important as his. He only had one life. He had to protect his own life well. The 3 of them failed to hit him. They raised their sword lights again and waited for another chance. Faced with this situation, Cloudmaster's clone was already gritting his teeth. The desperate attacks of the 3 guards had undoubtedly restricted him greatly. This restriction had already made him start to worry about his own life. But what he didn't know was that Chu Yang, who was chasing him from behind, was complaining even more, because Chu Yang could feel that the cultivation that he had forcefully increased was depleting rapidly. At this stage, it was already starting to run out of strength. The Calamity Sword formation was also showing signs of collapsing. It wasn't because of discord, but because of the lack of strength. Sometimes, a person's strength was limited. Even if he wanted to, he didn't have enough strength. The flaws in the formation were becoming more and more obvious. The most obvious one was the sacrificial maiden at the back. After all, this beautiful Wolf King wasn't familiar with this formation. Although she had tried her best to trust it, she still couldn't completely integrate herself into it like Luo Kedi. Although Mo Leier's situation was similar to hers, Mo Leier had spent a lot of time with the Calamity Sword formation. She could be said to be the person who understood the Calamity Sword formation the most in the world besides the Calamity Sword formation itself. Her confidence in the Calamity Sword formation and the Calamity Sword formation wasn't something that the Sacrificial Maiden could compare to. In addition, her own cultivation was also above the Sacrificial Maiden's, so she could still hold on. But the Sacrificial Maiden was already at the end of her rope. If the Sacrificial Maiden couldn't hold on and fell from the team, then it would definitely cause a chain reaction. The battle formation would crumble in an instant, completely collapsing. In fact, everyone could sense this, including the Sacrificial Maiden herself. However, they were powerless against this reality. Chu Yang was also helpless. He had forcefully destroyed the valley several times. His dantian had long been emptied. There was not a single drop left. His vision was turning black. However, he still did not give up. His head, which was in so much pain that it was about to split open, was still racking his brains to come up with a solution. Never give up. Giving up meant death. He could only try his best to hold on and make his final effort. At this moment, Chu Yang really missed the sword spirit that he hadn't seen for a long time. If the sword spirit was still here, he would have more power and could even control the Calamity Sword on his behalf. If that was the case, the battle would have ended long ago. But now, all he could do was wait. He was waiting for the moment when the Holy Monarch's clone would turn the tables. Chu Yang had determined at the first moment that the 3 guards were harming him at the cost of their lives. This may have some effect, but it won't play a decisive role. In the end, it couldn't change the overall situation. Then, was there any other way to change this extremely passive situation? So that they could safely defeat the enemy? The more Chu Yang thought about it, the more helpless he felt. Behind him, he could even feel Mo Tianji's burning gaze as he looked at him. He could feel Mo Qingwu affectionately gazing at his back. While Mo Tianji was thinking of a solution, he was also hoping that he could think of a solution. However, Mo Qingwu's love was unreserved. If I win, I'll laugh with you. If I lose, I'll fall with you. I'll follow you in life and death. I can't count on the sword intent. I can't catch up. I can't count on the sword intent. I can't catch up. I'm definitely not his match in a head-on battle. The 3 guards are risking their lives to stop him. It's futile. I still have a strong army, but they are all outside the valley. Moreover, their strength can't affect the overall situation. Inside. Except for the 13 people who are fighting with all their might, there's no one else alive. Chu Yang was at his wit's end. The only thing he could do was to mobilize the spiritual energy in the calamity space and use every bit of strength he had. But the feeling of despair in his heart still rose uncontrollably. But the more this feeling rose, the angrier Chu Yang became. Why? We've been through so many life and death battles. Are we going to stop here? We haven't faced the real enemy yet. This is just a clone. Can it destroy us all here? Am I, Chu Yang, not only going to die, but also implicate my brothers and my lover? We still have to bring glory to purple cloud heavens and pacify the demons. There are still many paths ahead for us. I'm not resigned to this. I'm not resigned to this. How can I be resigned to this? An unprecedented violent emotion suddenly rose in Chu Yang's heart. Blood was already flowing out of the corners of his eyes. His eyes were blood red. Right at this moment, the sacrificial maiden finally exhausted her last bit of strength. She was swaying and could fall from the sky at any time. The calamity formation immediately showed a flaw. The remaining people who were barely holding on also couldn't hold on at almost the same time. They were all about to fall. The formation that was originally in a state of dispersal suddenly showed signs of disarray. The 3 guards who were still trying their best to stop him closed their eyes. It's over. This battle is really a crushing defeat. And it's the kind of defeat where we can't turn the situation around. Once the formation is disrupted and the Saint's clone has a chance to breathe, they will immediately suffer the sharpest counterattack. And in such a situation, he can even easily strangle everyone to death one by one. He doesn't need to waste any more energy. Despair condensed in front of him. However, at the last moment, Chu Yang suddenly roared to the sky and spat out a mouthful of blood. Everyone naturally didn't understand why Chu Yang suddenly did this. Could it be that he spat out blood because of despair and anger? No, definitely not. But at the last moment, Chu Yang was finally able to completely gather the small golden person in his dantian and detonate it completely in his dantian, turning it into unparalleled power. Ignoring the excruciating pain that was worse than death, Chu Yang poured all his strength into the calamity sword. With this unprecedented tyrannical power, Chu Yang's body instantly turned into a furnace. He forcefully merged the sword intent and the calamity sword into one. His wrist shook. The calamity sword shot out like lightning with the power of wind and thunder. This sword already tore the space when it was released. The power of this sword, to a certain extent, could even be compared to the destruction of 10,000 tribulations. But Chu Yang didn't dare to use the destruction of 10,000 tribulations. Because he wasn't himself now. Once he made his move, everyone would perish along with him. Then, the meaning of risking their lives would be lost. Thus, Chu Yang could only do this. After the sword was released, before the result was determined, Chu Yang's vision was pitch black. He spat out mouthfuls of blood, and then he lost all consciousness. He didn't even have time to see whether his sword had succeeded or not. He completely fainted just like that. Behind Chu Yang, the 8 people spat out blood at the same time. Their formation completely scattered in the air, like a fairy scattering flowers. They floated helplessly and fell downwards, the large amount of blood mist in the air almost condensed into a substance. Chu Yang and the others. Almost at the same time, they spat out blood, lost consciousness, and fell to the ground. The 3 7-stars Imperial bodyguards didn't even have time to catch Chu Yang and the others. They could only watch helplessly as the sword light passed by. That sword flew towards the Saint's clone like a meteor chasing after the moon. It was a sword strike that had gathered all of Chu Yang's strength. It was a sword strike that had returned to its original state. Enemy slayer. The Saint's clone faced this sword. He was actually scared before the battle even started, and only knew how to dodge with all his might. The fear on his face could be clearly felt even from several thousand feet away. The calamity sword that had lost Chu Yang's control. As if it had a life of its own, it persevered and chased after him. Just like before. The only difference was that the calamity sword was faster than the saint's clone. Maybe it was a long time, maybe it was just a moment. After a flash of light, there was a poof sound. The calamity sword was deeply inserted into the saint's clone's back. The saint's clone paused at this moment. He was originally flying rapidly, but he suddenly stopped completely in the air. There was no buffer at all. His face revealed an extremely cruel and desperate look. He used his hand to grab the calamity sword that was already in his body. However, the moment he grabbed the sword hilt, his hand had already become like a chicken's claw. It was actually shrinking all over. He, who had no strength to pull out the sword, could only let go. Then, he started other actions, trying to struggle for survival. He could already clearly feel the taste of death, but he didn't want to give up. He only had one life. His desire to survive would never die. He screamed and swooped down quickly. The calamity sword shone brightly on his back, emitting a kind of demonic blood-red light. He rushed towards the mountain wall with the calamity sword just like that. With a loud boom, a big hole was made in the mountain wall. However, the calamity sword was still in his back. The devouring power was still in progress, as if it had grown on his body. He screamed and flew out from the pile of rocks. Suddenly, he roared and tried again. He actually split his body again. He used the phantom spirit transformation technique again. 3 phantom spirit transformation techniques appeared again. The moment they appeared, it wasn't to attack, but to escape. Without saying anything, they flew in 3 directions in a panic. This time, the Saint Monarch's clone was no longer an ordinary phantom, but a real soul phantom. Furthermore, all 3 phantoms were real. As long as any one of the phantoms could escape, then even if the Saint Monarch's body was destroyed and his cultivation was lost, he would still be able to make a comeback one day. Chapter 2544. These 3 figures were real, but at this moment, they were all illusions. No divine weapon could cause too much damage to them. This was no doubt the Holy Sage's clone's final trump card. The Holy Sage's clone was confident that once he used this move, even if he was heavily injured, his life would be safe. However, the following changes were far beyond the Holy Sage's clone's expectations. The calamity sword suddenly shone brightly. The 3 silhouettes had already dashed out, but they seemed to be forcefully pulled by an invisible force. Because of this invisible force, the silhouettes were twisted into strange shapes. They tried their best to break free from the pulling force, but they couldn't do so. The faces of the 3 incarnations were all pulled flat and deformed. They let out miserable screams together. In the sky, pieces of space gradually collapsed, and spatial cracks suddenly appeared. The 3 divinity transformation stage cultivators tried to escape into the space crack at the same time, but they were still pulled back by the invisible pulling force. Even though they had turned into thin threads, they were still being pulled back bit by bit. He was absolutely unwilling, but he couldn't get rid of it. He could only be pulled back step by step, inch by inch, getting closer to his own body. The calamity sword trembled and emitted a kind of calmness and coldness. Faint blood-red halos quickly dissipated. The range were getting bigger and bigger. It seemed that they had encountered the delicacy of their dreams and couldn't wait to chew. They couldn't allow this delicacy to escape from their mouths. The Holy Sage's clone screamed in despair. Finally, he seemed to have made an extremely difficult decision. The 3 divine transformation realm cultivators rushed back to his body. In the next moment, his entire body suddenly exploded. His flesh had been reduced to dust. Countless fragments scattered in the sky. At the same time, dozens of faint blood-red lights, mixed with the soul power of the clone, split into dozens of directions and flew quickly. This was the last resort that the Holy Sage's clone didn't want to use. Not only did he explode his own body, but he also had to forcefully split his soul into dozens of pieces. This kind of soul was extremely difficult to reunite, and the price was very heavy. However, as long as he could escape, it was worth it. The sword light of the Calamity sword suddenly flashed crazily. It seemed that this guy was very dissatisfied with this move at the last moment. It was very angry. The sword radiance immediately scattered in all directions. Countless tiny sword lights began to chase after the soul force that had exploded and escape. The 70 to 80 strands of soul power from the Saint's clone were intercepted by the Calamity sword. Most of them, at most, only 1 or 2 strands managed to escape in the end. The Calamity sword stood alone in the sky, flickering with light. It seemed a little annoyed. But in the end, it turned around and flew down. The sword light flickered, and flew into the space between Chu Yang's eyebrows. It disappeared. All of these things seemed to take a long time to describe, but the process was actually very short. From start to finish, everything had happened in the blink of an eye, in the blink of an eye. At this time, Chu Yang and the others descended from a height of several thousand feet. It was about to touch the ground. In their current state, if they were to freefall like this, there was no exception. All of them would be smashed to pieces, and their brains would be wiped out. At this moment, the 3 great protectors finally woke up as if they had just woken up from a dream. They quickly moved and shook their hands to release a series of powerful qi. He supported the falling crowd and slowly lowered them to the ground. Only then did he realize that everyone, without exception, was unconscious. He believed that no one would know the final result of this battle. After settling everyone down properly, he laid them down flat. The 3 great protectors still hadn't recovered from the battle just now. Until now, they still couldn't believe that they had actually destroyed the clone of a Saint Monarch. It seemed that the strength of this doppelganger was much stronger than many people after this battle. One of the great protectors sighed deeply. He looked at the few young men and women who were still lying on the ground. There was only deep admiration left in his eyes. Yes. This battle, the changes in the battle were so complicated, but the duration was so short. The outcome was decided almost in a moment. Another guard said with some concern in his heart, but, in this short period of time, how many changes have occurred, how much power has been used by each of them? How shocking and terrifying is that? The last great protector smiled bitterly. Yes. In this short period of time, the number of times the 2 sides changed their positions is at least more than 100,000 times. The rest can't be calculated at all. Chu Yang and His Majesty the Sky Emperor had the intention to fight with their lives on the line from the beginning. Otherwise, they wouldn't have fought so hard and so desperately. Yes. But I keep feeling that there's something I can't figure out. I also feel that it's strange, but I can't put my finger on it. According to common sense, it's definitely impossible to win this battle. When the 3 talked about the battle just now, there was still lingering fear in their hearts. Besides being dazzled and confused, they were even more puzzled. The first suspicious point of this battle is that we all know the Saint Monarch. Although the Saint Monarch might not know us, that Mo Tianji acted like he was unfamiliar with us at the very beginning and didn't do anything pretentious. Is there something we overlooked? One of them frowned and said, this phenomenon is somewhat puzzling. Even if our disguise is flawless, this clone of the Saint Monarch wouldn't be so stupid as to not recognize the position of his original body, right? In this case, isn't our disguise for nothing? The other 2 nodded repeatedly. Yes, this matter, we really can't figure out the meaning behind it. Secondly, Minister Chu's cultivation is the highest among our group. Although he's certainly not a match for this Saint Monarch's clone, he shouldn't have been beaten into the mountains by the Saint Monarch in a single move. This seems to be a little fake. Perhaps, it's a trick to underestimate the enemy. Another person pondered. I think that's most likely the case. Another person said, if not for this clone of the Saint Monarch would definitely not have waited for the brothers' battle formation to take shape. And if the battle formation didn't take shape, then everything would be empty talk. Perhaps we would have died a few hundred times already, but the most crucial part of this battle is still this battle formation. It forced the Saint Monarch into a state of special disadvantage, and the moment the battle formation took shape, Minister Chu and the rest firmly grasped the initiative and grasped the opportunity. The three of them shared one head. But why would the clone of the Saint Monarch allow the battle formation to take shape before making a move? One of the guards said, "Wouldn't that waste more effort? If it were me, I would have made a move at the first moment." The other two sneered in unison, "So you won't reach the level of the Saint Monarch in your generation." But they didn't know. Mo Tianji instantly sensed that something was wrong, so he asked, "Who are you?" This sentence would make the clone of the Saint Monarch think, "He doesn't know me?" Or, "Why doesn't he know me?" And Chu Yang was exquisite. Immediately after, he said, "This is the Saint Monarch." This made the clone of the Saint Monarch feel as if he was seen through. It was very unreasonable to not know the Saint Monarch. But if he recognized him, there would be a feeling of a secret being leaked. These two sentences made the clone's mood fluctuate twice in a short period of time. Thus, there was a firm belief, these people must not be allowed to escape. Since this was the case, he couldn't leave first. This was an atmosphere of a battle to the death. The most fundamental purpose was to eliminate the possibility of the Saint Monarch immediately escaping once the situation was unfavorable. Immediately after, Chu Yang took the lead. With his cultivation, even if he was definitely not a match for the Saint Monarch, it was impossible for him to be defeated so miserably in one move. Moreover, the Calamity Sword being caught was even more intentional. The Saint Monarch's one move was enough to determine the strength of Chu Yang and the others. Thus, he was fearless and gave Chu Yang and the others time to set up the formation. Because he also wanted to catch them all in one go, he was afraid that someone would escape and leak the news. With these people entangling him, he was quite confident that a few of them would escape. This was a subtle psychological tactic, and when the Calamity Sword formation was formed, all of this would be logical. For Chu Yang and the others, it was only at that moment that they had a chance to fight with their lives on the line. Every word, every action, every expression, every action, every action, every action, every single one of them was indispensable. The three of them waited anxiously. At the same time, they cleaned up the valley and disposed of the corpses on the ground. Although the corpses were piled up like a mountain, broken limbs could be seen everywhere, and blood flowed like a river. For a saint-level expert, moving mountains and filling seas was as easy as flipping one's hand. Dealing with these things was a trivial matter. A small matter like the sea turning into mulberry fields was done. After dealing with these eyesores, they waited for Chu Yang and the others to wake up. I have to say, the place that Master Yun chose to cultivate the 10,000 saints' true spirit is really not bad. It's full of beauty. After the three of them finished cleaning up, they were amazed by the environment and praised it. It's really not bad. When we retire from the heavenly court in the future, we can also set up a place like this to live out our remaining years and pass the time. One of them revealed a look of longing. But these few words, intentionally or otherwise, made the other two fall silent. After a long time, they laughed bitterly. Live out our remaining years. How can people like us live out our remaining years? Immortality is not necessarily a kind of happiness. Our descendants have all turned into dry bones hundreds of thousands of years ago. Our beloved women have long perished and ceased to exist. Living out our remaining years, to us, these words are too extravagant. Yes, sometimes even I feel lost. I cultivate every day and neglect everything around me. Is it just to seek immortality for myself? Another person sighed. What's the point of such a lonely immortality? Yes. Sigh, such immortality, how much loneliness do we have to endure? How much separation do we have to endure? Actually, I feel that, the pursuit of immortality, to put it bluntly, is nothing more than the fear of death. This guard's words made the other two roll their eyes. Chapter 2545. No wonder Luo Kudi kept calling him his brother, his boss. No wonder everyone treated each other like this, so that's why, all of them were sacrificing like this. As the boss, Chu Yang did not hesitate to go to the extreme and self-destruct his dantian for the safety of his brothers. The sacrificial lady was very clear that at that time, if Chu Yang was even a little bit selfish, given that he had complete control over everyone, it would be easy for him to make anyone self-destruct their dantian. The mentality of sacrificing one's friends but not himself, especially for martial artist. Even to go all out and make everyone else self-destruct their dantians, leaving only Chu Yang alone, it was just a matter of a thought. It could be done with just a thought. However, at this time where there was bound to be sacrifice to ensure the safety of others, as the boss, Chu Yang, chose to sacrifice himself without hesitation, it turned out that in this world, there was really such a sincere relationship. There was really such a selfless friend who could sacrifice for his friend. At this moment, the shock that the sacrificial lady received was really incomparable. Time passed little by little. Everyone surrounded the unconscious Chu Yang and waited for him motionlessly. Mo Qingwu had already carefully wiped Chu Yang's face clean. At this moment, Chu Yang was still unconscious. Everyone was guarding him by the side, waiting for their boss to wake up. Everyone's face was heavy, tears flowing down their cheeks. They were all men who had survived hundreds of battles, but at this moment, they were extremely weak. Chu Yang was still unconscious, not moving at all. Every time the brothers looked at him, sorrow came from their hearts, unable to be severed. "Boss, why are you so silly?" Chu Yang felt that he had fallen into a strange world. Before he fainted, he knew that he was really done for. And he could also feel the extreme pain coming from his body, as if he was being cut into pieces. However, at the moment when his dantian self-destructed at the same time, the pain that had just risen, just when he could not bear it, suddenly all disappeared. As if all the pain had been taken away. It also seemed to be his soul, leaving the body that was filled with trauma. Then, with a swoosh, he was wrapped in a glowing tunnel, instantly breaking through the nebula. Then, without knowing why, he felt that he had clearly seen another world. And then, he naturally entered this world. At first, Chu Yang had thought that he had died and had gone to the so-called heavenly kingdom, the netherworld, or even the netherworld. However, when he looked around, he felt that this shouldn't be the heavenly kingdom. In that world, the heavens were limitless. The earth was boundless, and the stars were densely packed. The sun and moon seemed to rise and descend beside him. Looking at the sun in front of him that was countless times bigger than him, he couldn't feel any heat at all. What kind of place was this? This place seemed to encompass the universe, and he was only a grain of sand in Taitsang. But why was this place? Chu Yang asked himself in bewilderment. He couldn't figure it out no matter how he thought about it. He was very clear about the decision he had made in that instant. Even if he was lucky enough to survive by exploding his dantian, he would probably have no hope in martial arts in the future. However, he would never regret it. "It is my responsibility to protect you. If boss didn't pay the price, who would?" This was a matter of course. In addition, Chu Yang was also very clear about this. Even if he wasn't dead, he should still be in a deep coma. In a world like this, regardless of whether it was the netherworld or the Yang Pass, none of this should have happened. Then, was everything in front of him just a dream? An illusion of a dream? But this illusion was a little too realistic. All of a sudden, Chu Yang suddenly felt that his body seemed to be floating slowly, wandering in the sky. Although it wasn't as he wished, it was still pleasant. In this world, there was only a glowing palace at the very top. Above the palace entrance, there seemed to be 3 words shining brightly. In this light, Chu Yang tried hard to see what words were written on it, but he only felt a piercing pain in his eyes. He couldn't see anything clearly. He could only vaguely remember that there was one word, and it seemed to be the word heaven. The moment he saw this palace, Chu Yang had a strong feeling. It's lonely at the top. Heaven is below me, and only I am above. This palace seemed to be above the heavens and the earth, and above all things in the world. Perhaps, there was already no one who could stand shoulder to shoulder with this palace. No one could stand shoulder to shoulder with it. Even heaven and earth couldn't. Then, who was the person who lived in this palace? In the distance, dragons roared and phoenixes cried. A few golden dragons and phoenixes that were hundreds of thousands of feet long flew over, covering the sky and earth. Even the sunlight was blocked by their huge bodies. It was as if dark clouds covered the sky, and only darkness could be seen between heaven and earth. Chu Yang had seen Ao Sheun and Rui Butong transform into divine dragons and fire phoenixes many times. Chu Yang had praised them more than once, especially the dragon that Ao Sheun transformed into. From head to tail, it was no less than a few thousand feet. But now that he saw the golden dragons and phoenixes of this realm again, he felt that Ao Sheun and Rui Butong's transformations were at most small dragons and phoenixes. But the golden dragons and phoenixes seemed to be shrinking. As they approached the palace, they shrank. The closer they were to the palace, the smaller they became. When they flew to the front of the palace entrance, the dragons and phoenixes that were originally hundreds of thousands of feet long became only tens of feet long. They didn't even look at Chu Yang when they passed by him. They just flew straight past him. Then, the golden dragons circled around and attached themselves to a huge pillar. The phoenixes flew one round and also perched on another pillar. Then, the two pillars that the dragons and phoenixes perched on had already become exquisite works of art with dragons and phoenixes carved on them. Chu Yang looked at the pillars that were almost able to support heaven and earth. He couldn't help but blink in shock. On these pillars, there were countless golden dragons and phoenixes. There seemed to be other kinds of divine beasts as well. He recognized some of them, but most of them he didn't. Could they all be those terrifying existences just now? This palace that was above heaven and earth floated in the air just like that. But the feeling it gave off was that it was grand and majestic. It was as if no one could make this palace change, not even the slightest bit. It was as if heaven and earth had already existed. This palace had already existed. Or maybe this palace had already existed before this heaven and earth existed. It represented eternity. Chu Yang tried to take a few steps toward the palace entrance. Just as he was about to reach the entrance, he suddenly felt a terrifying pressure coming from the front. The pillars were carved with dragons and phoenixes, as well as all kinds of divine beasts. One of them suddenly opened its eyes and looked at him coldly. There were no words and no further movements. Chu Yang had only opened his eyes, but he could clearly feel that if he dared to take another step forward, his soul would scatter and scatter. He would become a delicacy in the stomach of this divine beast. This signal was extremely clear. It was extremely bad. Chu Yang was shocked and stopped in his tracks. That divine beast looked at him coldly. It also didn't move. However, that kind of earth-shattering pressure had already taken shape. It had turned into a substantial storm, and was constantly spiraling in front of Chu Yang's body. A strong feeling of shock rose in Chu Yang's heart. There was actually such a divine beast in the world. These dragons, phoenixes, and beasts. The pressure they gave him was too strong. Or should he say, too terrifying. It couldn't be any stronger. Chu Yang had never seen such a thing in his life. It should be because the strength of these dragons and phoenixes was too terrifying. It seemed that any one of them was already stronger than the clone of Master Yun. In fact, even Donghuang Shueleihan, who was the strongest among all the people Chu Yang knew, was stronger than them. She might not be able to do so. What did this mean? Any one of the dragons and phoenixes here had the same level of strength as Shueleihan. Note, any one of them. They even surpassed Shueleihan's peak cultivation, and these dragons and phoenixes were just decorations in this palace. They were just decorations and couldn't even be considered as guards. Then, what level would the real guards and owner of this palace be at? Wasn't that terrifying enough? Chu Yang subconsciously stopped. He raised his head and quietly looked at this majestic and solemn palace in front of him. His gaze was calm and peaceful. He, who was used to going through great storms. It was no longer easy to be shocked, or to be intimidated. No matter how terrifying their strength was, it was no big deal unless they were dead. He understood everything with a single thought. After going through so many life and death experiences, naturally, the spirit of looking down on life and death was already formed in him. After a long time, the palace was still a palace. Chu Yang was still Chu Yang. He even started to pace slowly with his hands behind his back. It was as if this majestic palace in front of him didn't represent the supreme authority of the world, but merely a work of art that was worth admiring. Those dragons, phoenixes, and beasts were just purely decorations. And this place was naturally a tourist attraction. He only had one identity, a tourist. That was all. After another long time, a soft chuckle sounded and said, "Not bad." As this voice sounded, the terrifying pressure in front of him suddenly disappeared. It was as if there was nothing and the world was clear again. The divine beast on the pillar closed its eyes slightly. It didn't move at all. Chu Yang raised his head. Then, he realized that in front of him, a young man in white had appeared out of nowhere. This young man in white was tall and handsome. His eyes were as clear and boundless as the starry sky. However, his face gave off an instinctive feeling of coldness. Just by being glanced at by this pair of eyes, Chu Yang felt as if he was standing naked on a mountain peak. Even his thoughts were seen through at a glance. Everything about him was exposed to this pair of eyes. "Who are you?" Chu Yang narrowed his eyes and asked in a very polite and respectful tone, which was very rare for him. The young man in white looked at him with a warm smile. "You will know who I am one day, but not now." Breaking out in the wee hours. Monthly votes list, here we go again. The final madness. Chapter 2546. Chu Yang replied with an "oh" and said, "Then why am I here?" The young man in white looked at him with interest. "Didn't you think you were dreaming just now?" Chu Yang smiled and said, "But now I'm sure I'm not." The young man in white asked with interest, "Why?" "Because if I'm dreaming, I'm afraid I can't have such a dream for now." Chu Yang smiled and said frankly, "Dreams aren't reality. A thought is born. How do you know that you can't have such a dream?" The young man in white also laughed, as if he was chatting with an old friend, casual and easygoing, and his voice was warm. "What I see in a dream, if it's not man-made, is limited by my own vision. With my experience and knowledge, I can't have such a grand dream." "Can I discuss something with you?" Chu Yang suddenly said. "Why did you suddenly say this when we were talking? What's the matter?" The young man in white asked with interest. "Can you not look at me like that?" Chu Yang said something that seemed to be very thought-provoking. Look at you. How am I looking at you?" The young man in white really didn't understand Chu Yang's words this time. "Your eyes are too sharp, as if you can see through everything about me." "Everything. Forget about the 5 viscera, the original spirit, and the primordial spirit. That thing has been seen by you. Although it's nothing much for a man to look at another man, it's still very embarrassing. Can you restrain yourself a little? After all, I'm not a woman." Chu Yang smiled and said, "I've always been very shy." The young man in white was stunned when he heard this, and then he laughed. He laughed joyfully. "You're an interesting child. You're really too interesting. Before I said this, I didn't know you were such an interesting kid." Kid? Chu Yang was speechless. Looking at this guy's face, he seemed to be only a few years older than him, but he actually called him a kid so naturally. "Looking at my face, I'm older than you, okay? Cough cough. Let's go back to the original question, how did I come here?" Chu Yang ignored the question of being called a kid, and asked persistently. He knew that this topic couldn't be discussed. Although this guy in front of him looked young, he was definitely an old monster who had lived for God knows how many years. Once the discussion started, his identity as a child would be completely confirmed. That would be too damaging to his self-esteem. If you changed your appearance to that of a white beard, it would be more acceptable. But, to call me a child with such a tender face, because I wanted to see you, the young man in white said indifferently. "So, you're here." Chu Yang, how could he say that? It seemed to be getting more and more. "You want to see me? Do I have to come? No matter when?" As if he had seen through Chu Yang's thoughts, the white-clothed youth smiled and said, "Yes, whoever I want to see, he will appear here." It doesn't matter if he's alive or dead, or what world he's in. As long as he exists in this world, it's just a thought from me. Chu Yang clicked his tongue. This sentence was even more awesome. In the past few days, I've heard people say that you're a pretty good kid. The white-clothed young man said indifferently, I was a little interested and wanted to take a look. Today, I saw you. Not bad indeed. Someone said that I'm not bad. Chu Yang was a little surprised. Who is it? Someone I know? It doesn't seem to be someone you know. I can only say, it's the person who said that you're not bad. He's a guy with high standards. The white-clothed young man smiled gently and said, to be able to say that you're not bad from his mouth. In such a long time, you're the first one. Well, to be more precise, you're the only one. Chu Yang smiled bitterly. I didn't expect that I'm so powerful. Whether or not you're powerful is a matter of opinion. It's just that we're fated to meet today. The white-clothed young man stepped forward and said, Come, I'll show you around. Then, Chu Yang felt that he had entered this majestic palace. The moment he entered, he clearly saw that the carvings of dragons and phoenixes on the pillars and all kinds of divine beasts lowered their heads at the same time. It was a kind of worship that prostrated themselves on the ground. In an instant, the scene flashed and a garden appeared in front of him. A young girl in white was walking slowly in the garden, as if she was going to walk under the blooming flowers and trees. This young girl in white was holy and gentle all over. Her beauty was unparalleled in the world. Her temperament also made one's heart feel tranquil. As long as one was by her side, one could feel a kind of natural peace and tranquility between heaven and earth. As soon as she saw the two coming over, the young girl in white came to his side and asked gently, Master, who is this? The white-clothed young man patted her head a little dotingly and said, How many years has it been? How many times have I told you, don't call me master anymore? You've been an empress before, how can you still call me that? The young girl in white smiled gently and said, No matter how many years have passed. You're my master. The white-clothed young man chuckled and no longer forced her. He said, He's a very interesting child. I'll show him around. The young girl in white nodded obediently. Just as she was about to turn and leave, she suddenly said, Oh right, master, our Jian went out to fight again these few days. It's said that it's with that old black. He's never stopped. She wrinkled her nose, as if a little girl was complaining. Chu Yang almost laughed out loud. The white-clothed young man shook his head helplessly and said, If he stops, he won't be our Jian. That guy too, what's the point of fighting that guy again and again? It's not that he doesn't respect us, he just doesn't want to call me master. This is also a reason, but he's still so relentless and has been fighting him for so many years. Master, it's not like you don't know about our Jian's temper. Only the two of us can talk to him. Who else has he listened to? It's rare to have an opponent, it's not easy. The young girl in white rubbed her eyebrows in distress. That's also true. Let him fight. The white-clothed young man actually skipped this topic and said, Anyway, he won't be broken. Oh right, that guy didn't come these few days, right? He didn't come. The young girl in white clearly knew who her master was talking about. She smiled sweetly and said, That guy joined forces with Old Black last time and beat our Jian badly. After that, he didn't dare to come again. He's afraid of being beaten. The white-clothed young man couldn't help but laugh. The road of life is long. After such a long time, I really haven't seen anyone more slippery than that guy. Chu Yang cursed in his heart. You haven't seen Jimo, Luo Kudi, Tan Tan. If you see them, you will feel that there are still many shameless and slippery people in this world. After saying a few words, the white-clothed young girl left. Chu Yang continued to follow the white-clothed young man around the palace. He guessed in his heart, this white-clothed young girl looks like a maid. Ah Jian is their son? Old Black is their son's classmate? Or a friend, an opponent, or something? Finally, he couldn't help but ask, This is? The white-clothed young man said, Yes. Just now, this is my wife. Chu Yang opened his mouth, thinking that this was really strange. His wife called him master. He asked carefully, That our Jian is your son? The white-clothed young man looked at him with a strange face and said, Don't talk nonsense, our Jian is my brother. Chu Yang opened his mouth again. In that instant, he felt a little flustered. The way this family addressed him. It didn't seem a little strange. What was this and what was this? That old black is. Chu Yang felt that he had heard this name from someone before, but he couldn't remember where he had heard it. That old black. The white-clothed young man looked at him with a smile. You really have a lot of curiosity. Chu Yang rubbed his nose, not feeling embarrassed at all, and said, the desire for knowledge is human nature. Who doesn't have a little curiosity? The white-clothed young man laughed. Since this is the case, seeing that you are pleasing to the eye, let me satisfy your thirst for knowledge. Come with me. He took the lead and walked away. This, my soul has been out of my body for such a long time, will there be any problems? Chu Yang was a little hesitant. Chu Yang was also a great expert in cultivation. He had exploded his dantian, but he was still able to move freely at this moment. There was only one explanation, that his soul had left his body and entered a special place. But his soul had been out of his body for a long time, and his current situation was extremely bad. He was afraid that there would be problems, so he asked, Don't worry, with me here, how can there be any problems? The white-clothed young man said indifferently. This was just a simple sentence, but for some reason, the moment it came out of the white-clothed young man's mouth, Chu Yang clearly felt that the entire universe was trembling. It seemed that this sentence of the white-clothed young man was filled with the feeling that everything was under his control, that it was simply the supreme will of the heaven. It was even above the will of the heavens. While Chu Yang was carefully thinking about the meaning of this sentence, he heard the white-clothed young man say, Do you feel that you have been here for a long time? In fact, in your world, time hasn't moved. This is an application of the relative stillness of time, but you can't understand it at the moment. The white-clothed young man said indifferently, But when the time comes, you will naturally understand. An application of the relative stillness of time? Chu Yang was a little shocked. The same person here, time is the same as usual, but the body on the other side can't feel the passage of time. You can say that, although you are a little narrow-minded. The white-clothed young man nodded slightly. Narrow-minded? Then can I understand that if the soul here has died of old age tens of millions of years ago, but the other side where time is relatively still is still young? Chu Yang opened his eyes wide. Although it's still a narrow-minded understanding, it's theoretically correct. The white-clothed young man looked at him with some interest. This is just a small trick, it's not worth studying so seriously. There are many other applications, such as turning back time. One can see 1,000 years later at a glance. The sea is like a drop of water, the universe is like a grain, it's nothing more than the transformation of time and space. It's really nothing, I'm too lazy to say, just a sentence, you will understand when the time comes. Chapter 2547. Chu Yang coughed and resisted the urge to ask further, as well as the speechlessness in his heart. He originally thought that seeing those terrifying dragons, phoenixes, and beasts today was already very shocking. But he didn't expect that what was truly shocking was not even in the eyes of the owner of this place. There was actually someone who could use his own cultivation to do this. Relative time. And he even claimed that this was just a small trick. Such a small trick, how heaven-reaching, how frightening, how frightening, how frightening was its power. If someone could create such a space for himself, only half a day had passed outside, but 1,000,000 years had passed inside. If he practiced like this, wouldn't he be able to create a peerless master overnight in the eyes of outsiders? If such a method was used to cultivate talents, what kind of talents could be cultivated? This was the thought that flashed through Chu Yang's mind in an instant. What he didn't even know was that it was this strange idea that flashed through his mind today that would create another peerless mighty figure that would dominate the universe in the future. Well, this seemed to be the story of another book. The next book will start this story. In front of him, a door appeared out of thin air. The young man in white said lightly with his hands behind his back, With your current cultivation, you can read 2 books in there. After you finish reading these 2 books, you can go back. Chu Yang looked at him doubtfully. Read books. Read 2 books. Read what books? He thought to himself, you brought me here like this. Just to let me read 2 books. The young man in white laughed and said confidently, "Whatever makes you happy. You can read whatever book you want. You can read whatever you want. Everything is there. But you are only allowed to read 2 books. What you read in the end will depend on your own luck." Then, his whole person went into a trance and suddenly disappeared without a sound. A voice came from the sky. "If you, we will meet again one day. At that time, I will allow you to read books in there for a month." The laughter still echoed in his ears. The young man in white had completely disappeared without a trace. Chu Yang turned his head to look. He saw that there was already a vast sea of clouds behind him. All he could see were white clouds and grey dogs. As for the majestic palace, it was all gone. But the house in front of him was clearly a part of the original palace. The palace was gone. The study room was still there. He shook his head. He stopped thinking about these mysterious things that were beyond his comprehension and walked forward. The door suddenly opened on its own. The next moment, Chu Yang felt that he had entered that room. As far as the eye could see, he only felt that his brain was really not enough. Inside this room, there was actually an incomparably vast space. This space was so big that Chu Yang felt that it was at least comparable to the territory of a kingdom in the lower 3 heavens. Every bookshelf. They were actually as tall as a mountain. This space, is a study. In this vast space, there were rows and rows of neatly arranged books. "I can only read 2 books, TSK, how interesting." Chu Yang inexplicably thought of this sentence at this time. Suddenly, he felt an inexplicable sense of joy. He couldn't help but mutter, "He threw me into a sea of books, and only allowed me to read 2 books. TSK, what a strange person." Seeing so many books at once, even Chu Yang couldn't make up his mind for a while. He believed that even if all the books in a country were to be added up, there wouldn't be so many books, right? But Chu Yang also knew that since there were books here, there definitely wouldn't be any duplicate. Then, what do I want to read? What can I read in the end? Chu Yang stood at the door and fell into deep thought. If he couldn't determine what book he wanted to read before reading, then it meant that he would have wasted this opportunity. Moreover, Chu Yang realized that this out-of-body experience was definitely an unparalleled immortal opportunity. If he missed it, he would regret it for life. So, he just stood there and asked himself, "Chu Yang, what do you want to read? What do you need?" For a moment, Chu Yang really didn't know what he wanted. He didn't know if it was far away or in another space next door. Just now, the white-clothed youth gently held the white-clothed girl's waist and used his hand to draw in the air. Suddenly, a mirror appeared in the air. In the mirror, it was the scene of Chu Yang in the study room. No matter how big or small, everything could be seen. Looking at Chu Yang standing in the study room in a daze, the white-clothed youth smiled meaningfully. There seemed to be a hint of mischievousness in his smile, as if he had played a prank on Chu Yang. "I say, why are you still so naughty?" the white-clothed girl said gently, giving him so many books at once, but only allowing him to choose 2 books. "Aren't you deliberately making things difficult for him?" The white-clothed youth smiled. If it was an ordinary person, he would be forever lost in it. If it was a scheming person, he would also be lost in it. If it was an indecisive person, he would also be lost in it. He smiled faintly. "Don't look down on it. It's just a study room, but in the world, there might not be one person who can really find the 2 books they want to read." His eyes looked into the distance and said, "However, I have only seen one person who can choose the book he wants to read the most in the shortest amount of time." A strange smile appeared on his face. "Who?" the white-clothed girl asked. "It's Jun Mo Xie." The white-clothed youth smiled. "So it's him." The white-clothed girl understood and then asked curiously, "What book did that little rascal choose?" The white-clothed youth finally could not help but smile strangely. He chose the complete collection of firmament erotic illustrations. What? The complete collection of firmament erotic illustrations? The white-clothed girl was stunned. She stuttered. Her bright and beautiful eyes opened wide. Then, she started to stammer. Then her face turned red and she said angrily, This little rascal dares to be so disgraceful. Of all the things to choose, he actually chose that. The next time he comes, I will train him. I will beat him up with my own hands. The white-clothed youth's prank succeeded in framing someone. He laughed loudly and seemed to be extremely happy. He thought to himself, if that guy knew that Chen was going to train him, he probably would not come in this lifetime. It seems that I can really have peace for many years. The white-clothed youth looked at Chu Yang in the mirror and his eyes finally showed appreciation. He said, just the first step alone, he has already passed. In the face of so many temptations in front of him, he can finally calm down and think carefully about what he wants. This is already very rare. The white-clothed girl also praised. This young man's temperament is very similar to yours. The white-clothed girl turned to look at the white-clothed youth. He plans before acting, his mind is tenacious, his personality is persistent, and he values relationships. The white-clothed youth nodded deeply, but he is not as ruthless as me. The white-clothed girl snuggled in his arms and said, yes. But this is not necessarily a bad thing. Your ruthlessness is because of your experience, but he does not have your experience. On the other hand, you do not have his experience. That makes sense. The white-clothed youth's eyes moved and said, he finally moved. In the mirror, Chu Yang opened his eyes and took a step forward. At this moment, Chu Yang had already woken up, completely woken up. What do you want? What I want is eternity. What I want is eternity. What I want is the permanence of everything I care about. Eternity. This was what Chu Yang longed for the most. But what do I need to use to get my eternity? This is what I want to choose today, martial arts. Actually, I don't need 2 books, I only need to read one. Chu Yang's footsteps were firm as he stepped forward. A moment of enlightenment, a moment of enlightenment, an instant of enlightenment. On the first bookshelf, 10,000 schools of thought. Then, row after row, all of them were. Chu Yang only glanced at them. Without the slightest hesitation or pause, he walked over. Looks like he still chose martial arts in the end. The white-clothed girl sighed softly, seemingly a little regretful. He did not pass. You are wrong. The white-clothed youth quietly watched Chu Yang's movements and said, he also passed the second round. Passed? Why? The white-clothed girl asked puzzledly. Last time, those who chose martial arts in the second round were all eliminated by you in the end. Why did you let Chu Yang pass when he also chose martial arts? Because. Chu Yang chose martial arts because he had a purpose and something to pursue. He clearly knows why he chose martial arts. His real purpose is actually for love. The white-clothed youth said slowly, in order to protect, martial arts is just a means to him, a means to achieve the goal, not the real ultimate goal. And those who I eliminated before, they did it purely for martial arts. Their only goal was martial arts. There is a fundamental difference between the two. The white-clothed youth said, Chu Yang's greatest strength is actually his greatest weakness, that he can't let go. He sighed softly, since he can't let go, he has to protect. And once he has the ability, it is true that when a man achieves the Tao, even his chickens and dogs can ascend to heaven. He will never let go of anyone he cares about. This is his greatest weakness, that he is too tired of living. But today, it is precisely because of this greatest weakness of his that he passed this round. The white-clothed youth smiled slightly. You are wrong, I don't think so. In my opinion, this is not a weakness at all, but a strength through and through. The white-clothed girl said discontentedly, being responsible, unable to let go, being responsible, these are the most valuable qualities of a man. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.